Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is December 10th. This is our December board meeting. We'll call this meeting to order. We would like to, for those of you who would like to stand, we'll do a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, the agenda. Does anyone have any items to remove from the consent agenda at this time?
From the consent agenda or from the agenda?
From the agenda, my fault.
From the consent agenda.
For item A, from the consent agenda. No? Okay, will someone give me a motion to approve the agenda?
Well, I have items to remove from the agenda, but not the consent agenda.
Okay.
They're two different things.
Does anyone have any items that they would like to remove from the agenda?
I'd like to remove item 2.2 and place that in executive session
So 7A,
for 7A to place in executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters that refer to specific people that can't be discussed in open session. Same thing I emailed you about.
yes. Yep.
That wasn't what we talked about. The approach was moving it back. Chair Wool, can I just mention that, Commissioner Curry, is there any of 2.2 that we'd benefit doing in public that other commissioners might still wish to do in public session? And then we can take the portion you're suggesting into executive session, just, I think, to be fair to everybody.
Absolutely.
So I might suggest, I don't think yours was a motion, so let me propose this and see if it's acceptable to you. I move that we move item 7A down to just before executive session. So make it its own new number, and you can even call it new item 10, and then relabel executive session item 11 and adjournment item 12. That way we could start this in open session, we could discuss what we need to, it's public, and then we could take the rest in exec session.
Sure.
We need a second.
Yep. Second.
I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Any discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would split just to provide the right, that will look weird in the minutes as a procedure. So I guess I would suggest the portion of the
2.2.
2.2, I don't know how to do it. It's just gonna look weird in the minutes. So you're creating a new item 11,
I'm creating a
which
new.
would be the monitoring report?
Yeah,
So it would be discussion, and then I guess there would need to be a motion to take up the rest of it in
Yeah.
executive session at that time.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
All right. Yep. All those in favor of the motion to place item 7A, 2.2, hiring treatment of staff, and move it down to new item number 10, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Thank you. Any other commissioners with items to remove from the agenda? All right, all those next would be, can someone give me a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
So Commissioner Pillsbury, second by Commissioner Fisher. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Sorry. Motion passes. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. The agenda has been passed. Next is public comment.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I was going to pass it.
Start over.
Okay.
But no one
Hi, welcome, Jonathan.
Jonathan lives in your ward.
Okay.
It's okay. Good evening, BSD School Board. I very much enjoy attending these school board meetings, even if I don't understand most of what's being said. I'm learning how BSD provides education to Burlington's youth. Managing a school district is no easy task. Sadly, not many students know about the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. I'm slightly concerned because students don't really seem to have a voice at school board meetings, based from what I've observed. That's why I am starting up my Students for Change group again in January 2020. The focus will be more about increasing student voice rather than activism at the state and national level. Because students are most successful when they are involved in both design and implementation of an education system that addresses real-world problems, showing students that their own actions and opinions matter while they're in school will increase youth civic engagement. I have sent a copy of the group's proposal to propose comprehensive plan to Ms. Ryder, so hopefully it'll be in the meeting minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
Is this just for this issue or any?
Anything.
Any issue?
I'd like.
So you want to explain what happened? Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Chris Cadju. Hello, board, members of the audience. My name is Chris Cadju. I've been a resident of Chittenden County most of my life. I'm here to push forward an effort of safety for our children, teachers, and community. With the news stories lately, research gathered, and even local issues in our schools here, we all know that bullying is a very serious issue across our country today. From my own, and from hearing other parents' issues with this as well, I question the Burlington School District's zero-tolerance policy. Back to my own experiences here, I've had talks with my son's school about being bullied as early as in his kindergarten year. In specific, one child has been on and off bullying my son since kindergarten. They are both now in 3rd grade, and this problem still persists. Whether the children confide in their parents or speak directly to school personnel, we're seeing bullying as a repeat offense. How is this zero-tolerance policy allowing the bullying to continue? We all know that bullying happens a lot during off-school hours. I'm not here to address that issue directly, but to focus on the bullying at the public learning institution funded by taxpayers. Not just here in Burlington, Vermont, but in every school across the nation. My idea is to put cameras, CCTV, in all common areas around the schools, not just the hallways, but in classrooms, library, cafeteria, and strategic places outside like the playground. My goal is to curb bullying on all school grounds. For example, 2 children walk up to you, both have a black eye and are crying. They both claim that the other hit first. What do? Well, you punish them both because hitting is wrong. But one of those kids is going to walk away still a victim, and the other is still a bully. We punish the victim for protecting themselves. Do you feel you should be punished for protecting yourself? Not all bullying is physically noticeable. A lot goes widely unchecked or spoken about even. Especially with this current concern with toxic masculinity and femininity, the silence from both boys and girls is very prevalent. When these small instances happen over years, we see people of any age getting fed up and taking their own bad actions to quell the abuse. Even if the outcome doesn't go to violence, the emotional scars could be with you for life. On the flip side, we see bullies getting put back into the fold only to have learned how to not get caught the next time. Devil's advocates have made references to the widely acclaimed book 1984 and the problems with surveillance. I will say that 1984 has been around for years now. We can either side with the book and fear it in its weaponized form, or we can use it as protection and the fact of proof. And a proof of said actions versus a telephone game of trust from a recess aide who didn't see the entire incident, but only the resulting scuffle. Another point brought up was the cost of implementation, and I say this: how much money would you put down to save your child's life? I would give up anything for mine. Something to think about also with the recent outbursts of school personnel attacking students. I'd wager any school would want their own evidence versus some student's cell phone that wasn't turned on until after the scuffle started, which may not show the fact that the student struck first. I will also briefly touch on the recent test score findings of late and the ability to watch a teacher to fine-tune them into a super teacher if a case were to arise that needed attention. When we can have cameras up and down Church Street watching pedestrians, mom and pop shops with a camera behind their register, and cameras watching you shop at Walmart, I don't feel that protecting our assets that are our children, teachers, and community is at all outlandish. I end with this. I'm here to put my voice out against school bullying in an effort to quell bullies as soon as they are flagged. The sooner we reach these aggressors, the sooner we can help them stop and not cause lifelong trauma for future victims. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
At this time, we'll move to board reflections. Are there any board members that would like to share some reflections? Commissioner Vanchik.
I would like to thank Jonathan Fabian for coming out and speaking today and at several board meetings. I do want to say that we used to have two high school student representatives on the board. I believe one of them is still Sabin Hart. However, I've not seen him at a meeting. But last year, there was another one, and sorry, his name slipped. Isaac Gentleman. And I would like to encourage high school students to come join us on the board. High school students did not have a voting voice, but it's still helpful to have you engaged here with us at the table.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, both people who spoke. I just have a couple comments about both. With regards to the comments you made, Jonathan, I'm actually curious. It seems like you brought an issue forward around Students for Change and working on a presidential campaign, and I was hoping the board would hear back about how that got resolved. So I would like at our next meeting to understand how that got resolved and whether students can organize around a presidential candidate on campus and why or why not that can happen. It sounds like that's not a concern anymore, but I'd like to find out what happened with that. Secondly, as Commissioner Ivanchik said, we did have student reps, and it's actually a recurring theme. Over the past 6 years, the board has discussed this on and off. There's been kind of a placeholder for the way students get on the board, which I don't know if it's changed. My sense is it has not, but it was essentially that the building administrator would ask certain students to apply and they would get on if they wanted to. So it would be really great. And the board a couple years ago asked the student government to please look at the procedure and come up with some recommendations. This goes back to when Jake Bucci was on the board, and he's like graduated college now. So it would be great, just to pass on some of that history if students would take a look at how students get on the board and make it, a more robust, inclusive process rather than just the BA picking someone who they think would be good. So I'm happy to hear you're interested in that and student voice in general, and that definitely, I think the Social Justice Union was looking at that too. And then with regards to the comments on bullying, I appreciate you coming. It's a hard thing to do, and it's distressing to hear that, again, it's raising its ugly head. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee had conversations about it last year, and staff was doing some work to talk with families that were bullying incidents that don't meet the standard of the law. So there's a procedure at schools, and there's a standard that's codified in law, but there's many or most bullying institutes don't meet the standard of the law in terms of being investigated. So I would like to ask the administration to please put Mr. Gadju in touch with Sparks, who was addressing this, and the Diversity and Equity Inclusion Committee was talking with Sparks, and to ask that there be follow-up with Mr. Gadju, and have that the building administrator of the school where his son attends be involved, so that we start to address this pattern that we hear about. Sometimes it really gets intense, and sometimes we hear about these incidents from families who are willing to come forward, but it is a persistent problem, and I know restorative practices is a solution, but that doesn't address the immediate, more acute incidences that families experience. So I'd like actually to ask the administration to do that and follow up at the next meeting, knowing that, we have some action there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chris, for coming out. And Chris and I spoke earlier this week about his concerns. And so I do want to let Commissioner Curry know that Mr. Gadju has been in contact with Champlain staff and Principal Restighini. Sorry?
He spoke with them this morning.
Met with him. Thank you. I'm glad that happened. I also, after we spoke, sorry, I can't see you. After we spoke, I did some research and found that there are school districts that do have cameras in every room. Some do it for security reasons, and there's also a few that are doing it to help with professional development, where teachers can actually control the camera and record themselves and use it for self-development, and also with coaches and principals to help increase their skills and performance. I also found a lot of concern online and a lot of controversies of schools that put the cameras in and there wasn't good community engagement. And so my just total Googling read is that it's a complicated issue. It's not unheard of, but if the board is interested, it is something that is, it's not out of the bounds of possibility. So thank you for bringing that.
All right. Commissioner Carey.
Just on a different note, can you hear me? I just want to take a moment to just celebrate some of the wonderful things that are going on in our district, and just to let you know that I had the pleasure of visiting Hunt Middle School this past week, and it was a Friday morning. It was last week. It was a Friday morning, and I was accompanying the hero team on a field trip, and that school looked like a well-oiled machine. It was unbelievably clean. Everyone was doing what they were supposed to be doing. Kids had purpose in the class that I observed. They were so focused on their learning activity that happened before the field trip set out. And then they were so cooperative and wonderful and just enthusiastic throughout the entire day. It was just a thrill to see. And it just reminds me of, the good work that's happening in our district that we often don't pay enough attention to, I think. My intent would be to visit every school as soon as I can. I just haven't been able to get into many of them. But this was a rare opportunity that was a delight to observe this highly skilled team of teachers and students so actively engaged in their own learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Okay. And that will close board reflections and move on to good news. Superintendent Obang.
I'd like for Dr. Shelley Zafar to stand up or come forward or do a backflip or whatever you want to do. Recognize? Shelley's here on behalf of herself as well as her staff, who've done considerable work over the last several years. And I recently received a letter from the state agency identifying Edmonds as a PBIS exemplar school once again. And when you talk about issues of pro-social skills in schools and bullying prevention, this is the work that happens in our schools, and in particular, Edmonds has demonstrated this for several years. And I'll just read you a couple nuggets from the letter that talks about schools are identified as exemplar schools. They implement universal PBIS with fidelity. They measured at least 70% of tiered fidelity, so they've really integrated into their schools. They use behavior data within a problem-solving framework to improve student outcomes. They've completed annual self-assessment survey to inform implementation planning and demonstrated evidence that sustained implementation has had positive effects on learners, academics, and behavioral performance. And when you go to the school and you walk through, as Commissioner Carey has talked about, if you go to Edmonds, you'll see it in practice in terms of how staff engage with students and how the office and administration engage with students and how they problem solve and do the preventative work. So we don't have to have those measures of punitive afterwards. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Shelley. I'm sure you might have a few comments that you might want to make around PBS and the recognition of your school once again.
Sure. First of all, I really want everybody to understand that, well, actually, let me simply share the sentiment. Edmonds Elementary, it's a school, it's a home, it's a family. That's Claire knows the song. That's our school song. But this is an effort. Some people talk about implementing PBIS. PBIS is a practice in my school. It was being implemented originally, started 12 years ago, and we have continued with strong support by the faculty and staff over all these years. We never let it go, and that's what makes it work. And we have blended. It started with PBIS. We've added mindfulness, second step social skills curriculum, trauma-informed classrooms. We actually had a 3-credit college course that was run over the course of 1 year, plus additional professional development, and then restorative practices, all as a climate umbrella. So just like teaching mathematics or literacy, we have lots of tools to work with. We have incorporated many tools to really work on social emotional learning and climate for our community. We're not relying on just one thing. And now with PBIS really recognizing the importance of restorative practices, we're right on board with that, and actually one of the earlier adopters in the statewide PBIS system. But you have to know this is an effort of my entire faculty and staff. And you can walk up to any student and any faculty member in our school and say, what are the expectations? And you can also ask a 5-year-old who's running down the hall, you could just say, and so what are the hallway expectations? They'll tell you. It's really an amazing thing. Be safe, be respectful, be responsible. 3 very simple things, not a long list of rules, just simple expectations. But anyway, we're very proud of the 4th year in a row of being an exemplar school. And there's only 28 in the state out of 407 schools total, so yay.
While you're receiving your applause, can you turn around and show us your shirt again? So we can remember the school, it's a home, it's a family. And you did say that Chair Wool is familiar with the song, so she has agreed to sing the song today for us. Thank you, Shelley.
And thank you, Dr. Mathias, for being present. All right, next on the agenda is the chair's report. The board officers met, as we do every Monday, our huddle, and really short and sweet is our focus is on the budget, this meeting and next meeting, the 17th. We appreciate Superintendent Obang's communication from the tax commissioner. We received that about a week and a half ago. We will work with Director Lavery on the AOE, the student per pupil, equalized pupil. We'll look to our audit over the next month, and then we look in late December to the CLA from the city. So the next 2 meetings, this meeting and next, will be spent heavily with our commitment to budgeting for the next FY 2021. And I appreciate everyone's dedication to that. I just wanted to recognize what our work has been and will be, and we look to the district and the district leaders in the school, faculty and staff for that support. So thanks everyone for their past work on it and their future work in the next 2 weeks and January as we hone in on this budget. And I know that there was news today with regards to the healthcare settlement, and that will be something that we'll obviously be discussing. But thank you, everyone. So moving on. Next on the Yeah, thank you. We did want to put expectations for these next 2 meetings, timing, so to time-bound each item. And so I'll look to Commissioner Fisher and Commissioner Wick to lead us in the monitoring reports and also to the budgeting portion of the agenda, so that we will take a break, what we talked about with our implicit bias training last week, about having some norms, meeting norms, and when we make difficult decisions or time to take a break, we'll take a recess at 8 o'clock, but we hope to, based on our schedule, be complete by 9:30. So set that expectation as a board. And I did want to thank Commissioner Curry for organizing and Bonnie Ryder our training last week. Thank you for that effort. That was valuable to all of us, the feedback I got as well. All right, so moving on to the agenda. Item 6, approval of the consent agenda. We already did.
I don't think we actually, did we approve the consent agenda?
Oh, no. Commissioner Pillsbury, as amended. Thank you. Commissioner Pillsbury's first, Commissioner Wick second. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. The consent agenda passes. Next is the superintendent report.
7B.
7B, FY '21 budget planning.
Thank you, Chair Wolf. I'll ask, yeah, come on up. Director Lavery, around the budget process. We do have quite a bit of work in the next, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And as you know, throughout the process, the numbers will change in terms of the state numbers that we receive, in terms of the impact on our growth and also on the tax impact. So we'll have to do some quick turnarounds as we do it. And so Director Lavery's been working through a process where we can try to provide the board as much information as possible. So in January, when you have to make decisions, you've gathered the information that you need. And we started, I think last month with a number of, well, we started, I think it was 2 months ago with the information session, the Budget 101, and then with some follow-up, and then we've done the EL, we've done the special ed, and we follow up with some memos around that. So hopefully it's building your capacity to be prepared to make decisions around this. I did send out those memos from the state that gave some particulars around the potential tax impact and growth. It does not look great in terms of the state of Vermont, in terms of what the expectations are. Don't know if the state will have any restrictions on our budgeting. They have done that in a few of the years that I've been here, where they've come out and made restrictions and said, you can't spend over 2%, or you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Otherwise, you have penalties, or they've done the pullbacks in terms of our funding. But we will know that until January, so we'll have to be prepared to be nimble. We do have a presentation for you today. Last presentation, I think we laid out some items around that staff have been working on in terms of needs that they have, and we've tried to chunk it between this meeting and next week's meeting to pace it a little bit. We also have staff here to represent, for clarification. If you still need some clarification on specific items, we can provide that with you as well too. And we also have an opportunity to, we're going to start with talking about the library. I know you received the memo around the library budgeting, but we did have principals in our library committee doing some work in the last month, and we thought it would be good to start off with just that reflection to the commitment that we gave you, that we'd come back with some information. So just to hear some of the analysis around that, and then we'll get into the bigger budget piece with Nate.
So I just want to, we'll start, so we'll have 20 minutes allotted to this item, just so we're aware.
I will not.
It won't take that long.
Sorry, just to be clear, it's 20 minutes for the presentation by the superintendent and staff.
Yeah, 19 minutes and 30 seconds now. Come on.
All right. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Charles Cabretz. I'm the librarian at Hunt Middle School. I've met many of you
Welcome,
and have
Charles.
had conversations, maybe virtually. And I just want to thank you tonight for letting me share some of the proposed library budgets for next year. As you saw in the memo from Bonnie, the BSD librarian team worked very hard in partnership with their principals and following the directive to get this done to you in a timely manner. We met several times to discuss best practices in our field and what types of data we would need to present our budgets for. As a result, each librarian began with analysis of what we currently have. What does our collection look like? We looked at student needs, teacher and curricular needs, and presented budgets that you see here presented in the memo. While I can't speak to any other projects except for Hunt specifically, I want to stress that every one of them was prepared with thought and supported by data. None of that was just kind of thrown out there. Each of us was asked to prioritize our needs, and we did that when talking to our principals. That might not be reflected in the budget there, but we've thought about what is most important to us and what we could use second and third. We thank you for, again, looking at this important issue. We know that libraries are one of the biggest resources in our district that really impact all our students. The one-time funding that was allocated for this year will do very good into filling some of those gaps that, for some reasons, for decades in some schools. And so you can see that each of the requests for schools are different and that matches their needs. I would say, aside from the challenges of physical resources, digital, physical books, we also have challenges around adequate staffing. And having full-time library assistants is something we've been discussing, something the district has had in the past. But that would really let us as teachers do our jobs to the best of our ability. Pushed into classrooms, do some co-teaching, and that's something that we'd like you all to think about as well. We all acknowledge the need that is there in these different areas. In some cases, the budgets here are still less than they were several years ago. And I can use, for example, Hunt's budget as almost to the point where it was in the year 2000. And I know that because in the year 2000, 20 years ago, we undertook a BSD library evaluation. And we looked at our programming all around. And I had that report and I had that data. I was going to bring it. It's back there, but it's kind of heavy. And we knew that in 2000, many changes were happening. We were moving to computerized things, and we were moving to new school library standards. And we know now that many changes are happening. We're moving to a more digital world, and we have new standards and new science standards, new social studies standards, new ways that we're doing things. And we'd like our collection, our resources to reflect that. So we know that this might be one way. We don't want to come back every year and figure out how to fill in the holes that were there, and we don't want to end up coming back in 10 years saying, look at all these deficits. So perhaps one way of moving forward would be to undertake, in the same scope as were done 20 years ago, some sort of library evaluation. Given the time that we had, we only thought that that was a good idea. We weren't able to get into who might do that and how much it might cost, but we know it would take additional allocations. I'm happy to answer any questions or speak to this some more.
So, thank you, Charles. I don't know if the board wants to spend any time, but we do have limited time if we want to get into budget. But we did want the opportunity for a library voice around what they've been working on, and you heard the recommendation around the librarians feel that there should be some sort of evaluation audit done before they can take the next step. So I'm sure that'll come through our budget process in terms of costs and recommendations for that. So the board has heard that. So we can spend the time, continue this, or we can get into the budget since we only have 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'll ask one question on behalf of the board. The board's concern over library funding, did that initiate your, for example, the meeting on the 20th and 25th? I understand for this document and the follow-up, but in the past, had your librarians as a core met?
We meet monthly, but not so much to discuss. We haven't had the types of depth of conversation we had this time in planning. So sometimes certain schools would work in partnership with their principal to present a budget, and my understanding is that sometimes they were given a budget. So this was a new way that we all at least had voice in working in partnership to do that.
Commissioner Curry?
So I'm confused. Are we just ask some questions about non-budget questions right now? And then we're gonna talk about library budget. Is that what we're doing? This is about the library
Considering
budget,
the,
okay.
I'm just.
I didn't
we just-
understand your
No, yeah,
statement.
so we did send the library memo out, but we thought it would be good to
Right.
have a librarian here to give some voice to that.
Thank
And that was 2-minute item, because we only have 20 minutes to do the entire budget, and we've got a number of staff who want to speak to the budget. So if the board wants to choose to spend the time on this, you can, but I know we're restricted to time, so we want to make sure we get other staff on for the other budget items. So it's up to the board to manage how you want to move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry. The officers did discuss having the presentation first, and then 40 minutes for board questions.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Great, well, thank you very
I
much.
will have questions about the library budget.
Great, okay, so thank you very much, and we'll,
Okay, so we'll move on to the bigger budget presentation.
I have one question about the library.
we're gonna answer those after the
We're gonna do that.
presentations. Yeah.
Okay, Nate. Good.
Does that make sense?
That's okay. That's good.
Okay, so I think we'll be able to get quickly to the Q&A part, which was our main intent for this evening as well. But I did want to share, and I'll circulate a hard copy of the memo that I emailed out earlier. I just felt like it was too hard to cover this ground without something to look at and take home with you tonight, but it's also in your email. So I sent out a memo that simply provides an estimate, kind of a preliminary look at what the fiscal year 21 budget could look like if we essentially make no new investments or other changes, and we simply seek to maintain the current services level. So again, this is in your email, and it's also you're also getting a hard copy right now. Just let everyone get a hold of that. So here's really the take-home kind of messages from this. Number one, there's a little bit of variability in how someone might define a current services level, and so to that end, we typically think of it as being like, what does it cost to do the things that we're doing right now? What do we think it'll cost next year to keep doing those things? But I took the liberty of making a few changes that I think are justified, but they're kind of, reasonable people could disagree on this, and specifically that's with respect to special ed, where I incorporated $400,000 worth of increases for special education based not only on the fact that we know that, for example, tuition programs increase their costs and that sort of thing, but also just the expectation that demand will continue to increase in that area. So you could debate whether or not that's really the current services level and say, well, maybe it isn't, we're potentially going to provide more services, but to me it felt like in this environment that needed to be included in here. And similarly on the debt service front, where to the extent that we borrow money, particularly for BHS, we have to have enough money to make the first interest payment in the spring. So we actually just completed the borrowing the city did on our behalf. That typically happens in November. And the first repayment, you begin repaying that interest only in the spring. So this May, we'll make our first interest payment. So for that reason, I need to make some assumptions about how much we will borrow in the next year. And that is subject to board discussion and approval, but it's articulated in the memo what I did and what I assumed. So having said that, I think the key piece of this little memo is just the chart that gives a few scenarios based on whatever type of wage increase. And really, I put 1%, 2%, and 3% just to make it simple, and also so that it allows you to kind of get a sense. I guess I could have put the dollar change there, but it kind of gives you, I think I put it in the notes that, that essentially every 1% increase in wages carries a cost of roughly $550,000. So you could run that number in any way you want. It's going to be linear, and you can pick your number to get a sense of what we're looking at. But the chart kind of reflects the fact that based on the increases I assume, and I detail more of them on the second page, that we would be looking at somewhere between a 3 and a 4.2% budget increase if wages grew by, again, 1 to 3% range. So I felt it was important to have this to kind of contextualize your discussions around the substantive changes that people are seeking in the new additions, because obviously those would be in addition to whatever we come up with here as a kind of baseline growth amount. So again, the point wasn't to go into detail on this tonight. It's really to take advantage of the staff we have here to talk about the substance of the various proposals, but I felt like it was important to at least have a look at this and kind of be able to put some of these requests in context of what total budget growth could look like. So we, as part of our Q&A, we can discuss this as well, but again, I'm hopeful that we can take advantage of the folks we have in the room to go into the substance of the things, and maybe questions about this might be best held to the end, and we can dismiss other folks.
I'd like to acknowledge Director Lavery. Thank you. This morning, our conversation and touching upon this, I greatly appreciate you compiling this memo for tonight's meeting. It helps us a lot in guiding and giving us an overview. So thank you very, very much for putting this together in a short notice. Thanks. So we will wait to hear from the superintendent next.
Yeah, so the one last thing I just wanted to mention that is not part of this, and I think it may be something you discuss later, so we don't have to belabor it, but is just to make clear that nothing in here changes the budget for the school board specifically, and so that's another, as part of our process, we're supposed to make sure that we've budgeted enough for you to meet your board initiatives and training prerogatives and so forth, or whatever they might be. So I just wanted to make sure that I mention that again. If there's a specific direction that you guys want to provide me, I don't want to lose sight of that when we kind of dive into all the programmatic stuff. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
So I think with that, we can go to the Q&A and see who do we actually have here. Thanks for sticking around, Charles. So we could kick off maybe with the library, but I'll let you guys decide. We've also got Stacy. I see someone, Maddie, back there fixing her hair for the cameras. We've got Laura.
Start with Stacy.
So we've got Miriam over here. Yeah. So,
Elementary will go up.
or yeah, we could go in order. So maybe
Stacy,
Stacy, you want to go? You got.
Great. Welcome. And we'll have Commissioner Fisher will manage board agenda
So,
timing.
I'm sorry, Director Lavery, are you presenting, Stacy, or you're just here for
No, I'm
questions?
just
Okay.
here
question.
to represent the elementary team, the principals, and myself for the early ed program, if you have any questions about our proposals.
Thank you. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to start with a round of 3 minutes. So each board member has 3 minutes for question and answer, and then we'll all do 3 minutes and see where we are. We've allocated 40 minutes for this discussion.
Clarifying question? Stacy's sitting at the mic, right? But our questions, if we only get 3 minutes, can go to
Can
anything.
go to any subject about the budget.
Do you want other people to come up here? And then that way, if there's another question.
Yep, Superintendent O'Bank.
Thank you for.
No, I was just wondering in terms
I gotta
of your
fix my
process, the PowerPoint that Director Lavery shared last time around was put in categories.
Yep.
So we have administrators here who speak to the categories. So you could, that's why we have Stacy going first. You could speak to the elementary piece, you could do that conversation if you want it, and then move to the middle, and then move to the high school, if that, or you can go to this style, just random.
Okay.
So whatever works for you, but we're prepared to do that sort of synchronized approach. So we've got people for each of the panel levels to address those questions, so we can
So we
stay focused.
can look at, right, so we can look at the board members can look at the Excel document that was distributed to us that identifies per budget item. And then we can also, Bonnie, if we need to, go back to last month's board doc slide presentation, so that as we speak to it, we can start, like you said, Superintendent O'Bang, in the order of elementary, middle, high school, and then district, and then obviously with library, we can, include that as well, depending on where the conversation goes. So we'll start, like you suggested, at elementary.
Well,
Commissioner Fisher, yeah.
Do you want to just go in order of this? Start with climate?
But then
Go
how do
stop
we,
down.
so are we just scrapping the 3 minute thing, or everyone?
No, we're talking about categories we're discussing based on, Oh, so your 3 minutes is based on any question?
Yeah.
Yes,
In other
okay.
words, to be fair to all commissioners, to make sure that they have an opportunity.
Got it, you're right.
That nobody dominates or doesn't have enough opportunity to speak.
So we're sticking with the original plan.
I think we should, and if it turns
Okay.
out to be a disaster, we will
Too
try
much-
something
We'll
else.
adjust.
Yeah,
Okay.
too much ping pong.
All right, so we'll start with 3 minutes per commissioner, and you can hit anybody on the panel.
Is that not a good frame of,
Sorry.
your choice of words?
You can leverage their expertise. Pardon. Monica, you had Sure.
Stacy here, who's early ed, but tonight you're representing elementary schools?
Yes, I
Okay.
work with the elementary principals. We work together. I'm with them. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
What's the name of the document? Is it the one from last week?
Yep.
Budget, education. Is that not online? Yeah.
That is online.
It's attached to our board docs.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, so, which commissioner would like to go first?
Do you want to start in order?
Are we going round?
Oh, no, I take it back. Yes, it is.
I'm just asking who would like to go first? Commissioner Pillsbury?
Okay, I know you're gonna cut me off, so I just want you, I'd just like you to sort of explain the certified behavior analysis. Just give us an idea simply what they are, what they do.
Is this for the elementary, the
Yes.
BCBAs? Yes. So we really feel that we need to have more support for the children that are experiencing ACEs and social emotional needs. And we really want people that can be at the schools full-time that can dedicate the attention so we can really focus on multi-tiered systems of support and not overextending our special education identification. Many children are coming in, especially even at the kindergarten K1-2 level, with really intense needs that we don't know about because again, we still have a wait list for early ed. There's a lack of high-quality programming for kids prior to preschool or prior to kindergarten. So we felt like the BCBAs who can run the program and have that background in behavior, they can come in and actually work with the kids and work with teachers. So that was our hope for the BCBAs.
Okay, and I assume that would be both preschool and elementary?
Yes, that was the hope, yes.
You're asking for, I'm going to stick with the early kindergarten initiative. Could you just say in a few words what that is?
Sure. On those same lines, we're finding some children are still being suspended or asked to have limited hours of kindergarten, so not being able to access a full day because of behavior, being not ready for kindergarten, and their behaviors getting in the way of their education. So we really felt as a team that we really need to look at a positive change for that, and to do that, we really want to look at kindergarten teachers in 2 of our classrooms in the district, partnering with early childhood special educators in a supportive teaching model, along with general ed para to help support the kids. We haven't really gotten specific. We wanted to wait and see what the board's questions were and kind of what direction we wanted to go in, but we had some ideas about kindergartners being, with the late birthdays, being able to have this year that was more developmentally appropriate, really focusing on the social emotional growth, the play periods. We also have a policy where, we have a policy where we have early admittance. If you turn 5 within the months of September, you can apply for your child to come to kindergarten after the cutoff date. And so we felt like this would be a solution to that as well as the wait list that we have in pre-K.
Alternative suspension, a couple words on what that is? It's not you, I'm sure that somebody else said.
Alternative
It
suspension.
sounds like safe and inclusive schools.
That might be.
That'd be Sparks.
I'll speak to that. Yeah, that would be Sparks specifically. We actually, for the last couple of years, we've had a strategy around reducing suspensions and increasing instructional time. And one of the challenges schools have had is situations when they do have to displace a student from a school in a suspension or whatever. What do we do with them? So we want to develop programming that we can displace a student and still continue their learning. And so there's resources that need to be supported to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Pillsbury. Commissioner Goulart?
Thank you for being here tonight. I have sort of a general question about what we're here for and what we're doing. On the board, I see our role as being, people who create policy and ultimately do put together a budget. You are the experts. You know what your schools need. You know what your students need. I see a list of items that all seem pretty incredible, relevant. They seem to fall into our mission. They also seem to fall in with our strategic plan. How would you help me make decisions around these items? And moreover, could you possibly give me a sense of which ones are most important? If you had to rank them, could you do that? Because that could also help me make a decision.
Can I start on that one? And I'll let you- So the slides you received last week in the categories elementary, middle school, they were listed in rank order. So the one at the top is the most pressing, urgent need.
I think as well as the principals, we have met and we've really been, unlike, we started last year and we really have been working, doing it this year, is really talking with each other around system, not just my school, what my school needs. And us understanding that if we give support to the pre-K kindergarten, hopefully by the time they get to middle school, they have those supports put in place. And we will not need as many of these pieces. And I also feel like these positions should also be fluid as well, that we're building them into certain schools right now. But I also feel like if Edmund says to me, you know, we are really having these issues, that we should be able to support each other in moving resources around the district and not just saying it only stays in the school. So I feel like out of all the years I've been here, we have really been communicating as a system.
Yeah, I would say to echo that, the elementary team really worked closely together, similar to what we did last year. They are rank ordered, and we did feel really strong. We were really trying to think system-wide, which is why you'll see clumped together. But then when we got to SA and realized that SA didn't have full-time unified arts, we really felt like it was important to put in the 2 classroom teachers so that they could have not looped classrooms. So again, as a team, we decided that that was something we wanted to put forward instead of individualizing our schools or programs.
So I do have a little to add to that I totally support what was said previous to this, but I will also underscore that we have to keep our eyes on our older kids too while we move forward, and knowing that we have some very high needs there as well, also in our alternative programs. So I would find it hard to really rank things from my own perspective, but I would say we should move forward on the things that we know we need without sacrificing too much on the other end, you know, to find a balanced approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add that, like everyone else who's spoken, I found the opportunity to speak with colleagues and to get feedback from them and to ask questions about what does that mean, why do you need it, and so on, extremely helpful. Needing to sort of justify my thinking, not only with staff who know about English learners, but with staff who don't necessarily know as much in depth, was really, really valuable. In general, in ordering the items on my slide, I went with things closest to the students as the top, but I would just caution you not to always think about that, because I think you can fall into a false dichotomy. Sometimes if there isn't an infrastructure to support something that's going to ultimately benefit the students, putting something close to the students without an organizational plan to support it won't be successful. So a lot of thought went into this, and it was collaborative thought. That's a great process to be a part of.
Chair Wall?
So board members reflecting on the November 19th document, Bonnie has it up, so if we want to go back to, just briefly, if everyone looks up, elementary school priorities listed in priorities are set, and this is what we discussed last week. So thank you very much, Stacy. I know board members are still going to go around, but again, we have that access, so if you want to call it up as you're speaking, please do so. Commissioner Carey.
Commissioner Carey.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions here. So, are the magnet coaches included in this document?
Elementary?
Are they included in the budget for next year?
Magnet coaches, I believe the answer is no, that we didn't include the additional one. Let me just double check that, not to take any more of your time right now, and I'll answer you in a moment. I think I know what you mean.
I mean the magnet coaches.
Oh, the magnet coaches. Then I think the answer is yes.
There's one
But let me
magnet
double
coach.
check. I think the answer is yes. But you can carry on and come back.
Okay. So I noticed on the second item, the curriculum coach, SAIAA, that, and one, the purpose of that is to bring them up to speed with the other schools so that they each have a full-time, because they're half-time curriculum coaches right now at SAIAA?
Yes, I believe that's the reason we wanted to bring everybody up to having equal access.
To instructional coaches?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe that's why.
And that's why I asked about the magnet coach, because that was a separate position that the board, okay.
I can answer your question now. So they're not part of the presentation list up here. They're already in the
Okay.
kind of current services
Great.
level.
Thank you.
So point of
And-
clarification, Commissioner Carey, where are you seeing curriculum coach?
Second item at the very top.
Oh, it's at the top. Thank you,
Instructional
sorry.
coach.
Curriculum, thank you.
That's instructional.
Is
Thank you.
that just the one that was approved earlier this school year?
It's definitely, I'm sorry.
Yes, Superintendent Obey.
Our curriculum director is not here, who's leading this piece, but I'm pretty sure the board supported adding instructional coaches this year, right? We had to ensure that it gets in the budget for next year. So I'm sure that she wanted to put this on the budget now to say that if we want to have it permanently, that it needs to be in the budget, and the board needs to see that and say, yes, let's put that in as a permanent piece of the budget for subsequent years.
So magnet in the baseline, instructional.
So the magnet coach is already there, they're in the budget, so this needs to be approved to get in the permanent budget.
So just to clarify, 1.0 instructional coach is currently assigned to SA and IAA. And this would bring it to an instructional coach for each of those schools. That's correct? Yes,
Yes,
that's what I thought.
that's my understanding.
That's
yes.
what I thought, okay.
That's not what he said.
No, because that's not in the budget. That
This adds to it. They're already in the budget.
1 minute.
Can we, let me,
Oh,
well,
I
Victor's
can-
here. Victor can do it.
Victor's here to speak. Stephanie was the curriculum team, not the
Yeah.
elementary.
So, I will text Stephanie to be for certain on this. My understanding is there is no instructional coach at either magnet school right now. That there are magnet coaches, which are in the budget to carry over into next year's budget. This is new, so this would be a shared instructional coach. So it'd be 1.5 coaches at each at the magnet schools, 1 coach at each of the non-magnet schools.
And Stephanie will be here next week with the next group, so you can ask the question again to get further clarification.
Okay, can I ask another question?
13 seconds left.
It's about the 400,000 for the board certified behavior analysis, where there are 3, on the slide that was up there, the request was for 3, and here it says 4.
I think that's just a typo on the spreadsheet version that I created after. So it's 4 total, of which 3 were kind of put in the elementary level. So think of it as kind of half per elementary school, and 1 for the preschool level. So it's 4 total. And I think I identified this maybe a few days ago, that just the spreadsheet version where I kind of condensed it all line by line, listed it both as 4 at elementary and I think it may have added an additional 1 at preschool, which would make it 5, so it should only be 4 total. Does that make sense?
So we'll make those changes on the Excel chart?
Yeah, we can update that. Do you follow me? 4 total, inclusive of the early ed.
Okay.
Commissioner Sowers.
Thank you guys for coming tonight. I appreciate it. I want to follow up a little bit on Martine's process questions, because in looking at all of these, I struggle with what is truly necessary, what are the have-to-haves, what are the nice-to-haves. So my first question is what was, when you went about this process, what was your mission, or what was your question that you were asking? Was it, what do we need for next year that we currently don't have? And was that the only question? And then my follow-up question would be, did you look at what are the redundancies of are there redundancies? I know we had questions as to whether the behavior interventionist or the board certified behavior analysts, can we Is that redundant in any way? And if we were to give you some of these, are there other things that you wouldn't mind us taking away? So if we come to budget crunch time, I feel like this is one part of the equation, but I feel like we're missing part 2 and 3. I don't know if you could shed light on the process, and I'm learning it.
I can speak. So Meg Knoll and I sat together. Meg and I really worked on learning as the center and how can our kids, all our students, access education and keep them within the building. So our thinking was to add an additional teacher for our, it's not the Alterian program, but it's middle school becomes a really big world, and how can we shrink certain kids' school day or area down, kids with anxiety or kids with some behavioral struggles. So that was our thinking, is how can kids access their education, with that also allowing every other student to access their education when kids are struggling within the classroom, and trying to keep them in our school building, because what we know is when kids leave our building, it's really difficult to get them back into the public school. So we're working really hard to keep our kids in our community. So that's where our focus was on learning, and just thinking outside the box on how we can keep our kids in our community.
Just to echo that, similarly, we were meeting several times as principals at our PLC meeting and breaking up into groups. So again, I was with the elementary team. We were really looking at the crisis that was happening in kindergarten this fall, and children, like I said, being suspended, not being able to access their education. I know of one student who, for example, chose to leave kindergarten and go to a private childcare that's out of district. So that's been a tax on my program that now has to serve a child in a non-traditional way. We talked a lot about the behaviors in kindergarten and developmentally appropriate practice, and kind of how last year we made some headway with getting general ed pairs in classrooms, but not all classroom teachers got that, and that how it's really struggling when you have social emotional development happening and you have to say, okay, pause, I have to leave and go to the other room now. And so not having one person dedicated to help that teacher. And we looked at ratios in classrooms for the elementary. So our number one across all of our principals was the classroom for I forget what we're calling it, but the alternative kindergarten, kind of having that step up for more social emotional learning.
So I also have a little bit of input on that. So from a special education point of view, pre-K through 12, I can say that I generally focus on legal compliance and access for kids with disabilities when I look at through this lens. But the recommendations the principals made across all levels speak much to what I would look for. So I did not add things. So speaking to the idea of redundancy, I did not add requests that I saw already represented here that I felt that would meet that need. I will share that I am concerned that even if we approved all these things, that we would be able to find the people with the qualifications that we're desiring, and I think that's something to keep in mind going forward. But I don't really see this being heavily laden with things that are not necessary, given the great need that we have in our district and the increasing level of trauma that we're experiencing in our schools.
Thank you.
Last but not least, my thinking went just like this. What's not working? What is inequitable? And what do I hear consistently that both people in schools and parents are saying this, and it's the same thing. So what's not working? It's impossible for a student at age 15, 16, or 17 to enter Burlington High School, take EL math, elements of math, pre-algebra, algebra, and have enough math to graduate high school. It's impossible. We don't have it set up for success for mathematics for many English learners. What's inequitable? It's inequitable to have an academic language coach for elementary schools and not have that same support for middle schools and high schools. What do parents and other faculty and staff in the schools say in general? Promoting parent engagement, genuine engagement, and support of all parents in their children's education makes a difference. Utilizing students' native languages as a bridge from there being monolingual speakers of that other language to bilingual or multilingual speakers of English matters. I've heard that from faculty and staff and community. Those are my priorities.
Thank you. Commissioner Vončić.
So I have some similar questions to Kendra. Today, we got a document from Nathan Lavery about growth in the budget necessary to sustain the current service level. And teacher negotiations are not done, where there's going to be wage increase. And I would like to know, and then there was various increases that are necessary just to sustain what we have right now. And then I want to clarify, this list here, this is a wish list, correct? Mm-hmm. And it's $4.5 million. So I would like to see a number just to sustain what we already have. What does that imply for the taxpayer? Where do I have $4.5 million that I can say, eeny, meeny, miny, moe, this is more important than that? What are we going to fund? I know that our taxpayers are already overburdened, and you know, if it was up to me, I on the federal level, I wouldn't allow for defense spending. Like if you look at the big piece of pie compared to education spending, easily I would prefer to approve all these positions here. So I don't know if Nathan, you've done the math to figure out the document that you sent us today, what kind of percent tax increase does this mean for our taxpayers?
It's a good question and a reasonable one. Unfortunately, we are too early in the process to have the information necessary to do those calculations. So there's 4 main variables that go into that tax calculation. One of them we just received in the letter from the tax commissioner early in December that provides the dollar yield, or for income payers, the income yield. It doesn't mean that much, frankly, on its own, other than the fact that when those numbers go up, it allows us to sustain a little more spending without increasing tax rates. But that's the first variable. There's another variable that is the number of equalized pupils. That is not a simple head count of who's in our school district. It's a function of both enrollment over the past couple of years, as well as the characteristics of those students that are enrolled, including whether or not they're preschoolers or secondary students, whether they have EL status or they're on free and reduced lunch. So that equalized pupil count comes from the state. So that's something we typically get a first look at that at some point in the middle of December. I think probably that, and it usually undergoes some revisions, but usually we're in the ballpark when we get that first number. I suspect it's going to be a little delayed because of the challenges in actually getting enrollment data through the statewide collection of, and we've talked about that before when Karen Vogel was here about enrollment data and submitting a new process. So there's that variable. There's total spending, which you have to divide by equalized pupils to get your spending per equalized pupil. That's the part that you folks control. Of these 4 variables, there's one of them that you actually control. And then the last one is the common level of appraisal, which is applied to our equalized tax rate to make it the actual tax rate you see on your bills. We can go into that in more detail. I can tell you look excited. But I won't spend any more time tonight other than to say that usually is the last variable, and that's pretty much like the very end of the year. So we don't really have all the ingredients we need typically to give you a tax number until the January meeting.
Great, thanks. I now remember these things from a year ago. Also.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Vončić, you passed your 3 minutes. So
Okay.
there might be a bonus round, so stay tuned.
Mr. Wick.
Superintendent Novak?
Yes, please, thank you. Just a comment based on some of the comments from board members. A process we're going through, and from the staff perspective, this is their first analysis in terms of their needs and their wants, right, in terms of doing that. And the board will have to make some decisions, and Nate and I have talked about whether if we need to present you with the questions that you think you should be asking yourselves, or maybe you guys have already been talking about it. But one of the things you'll have to identify is what is your increased tolerance, to the budget itself. I mean, that narrows it down, right? If you say, well, we're okay to go, maybe 2 million more on our budget, right? And that could be roughly whatever. And then that tells staff, okay, you have to get it within that threshold. And then even within that, the board could have some direction on that, can say, we want only to deal with things that are elementary or whatever. And I'm sure everyone has opinions around it, but those are questions that you'll have to kind of come some decisions on as a board to give some direction. If I look back at the last year, the board was very passionate about a number of things that they brought forward. It said, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. So I would think that would be in your conversations in terms of that goes into your increased tolerance. But as Nate said, in terms of giving you actual impact, it's early for that, 'cause we don't have all the variable numbers. But the documents that I sent you really gives you some foreshadowing, right? I don't believe we're in the tax year where we're going to be able to spend a lot and have a low impact, right? So think about that.
Commissioner Waltz.
Speaking of equalized people, Nathan, sorry, we're all basically talking to you tonight. Not necessarily a question, but I definitely want to explore the pros and cons of including special education in our equalized pupil formula.
Equalized pupil is a statutorily defined calculation, so we don't have the ability to make that change unilaterally. It's something in state law. The state is studying the funding formula right now. I don't know what the outcome of that will be, and it's possible that there will be some allowance for that, although traditionally that has not been part of the calculation because special ed is funded through a different mechanism.
Are you saying it's not possible? Because you actually did say it was possible a couple of meetings ago, that we could include it.
The difference is we can, when we are developing our own methodology to distribute funds in an equitable basis, we can do whatever we want.
It's our equity formula.
Right. So we could include that in our own developed equity formula. But in terms of the kind of capital letters, equalized pupils that are used as the basis for tax rates, those are statutorily defined and we can't change those.
I'm not trying to change state level.
Right.
Yeah.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you. So I appreciate all of you coming tonight and in some of the responses to the questions I've heard. More of what I'm looking for, which is really a programmatic context for understanding the requests that have been made. So I think I just want to share that I don't want to sit here and pepper you with questions about individual line items because I find this a very operational budget. And I don't think that's really the conversation we as a board should be having. I think what I'm more familiar with is having a presentation that provides us with more of a programmatic analysis with the cost and benefits of making these decisions. So, generally what I hear this year is a focus on behavior, supports, and the need to kind of fill in those gaps around the kinds of environment that you all are experiencing in the classrooms and in the schools. And it concerns me to hear that because I'm very sympathetic to it, but also because to me it says that the state has essentially defunded social services and transferred them to the school budgets. And I just want to make everyone aware of that because that's exactly what I think we've all predicted for a long time. So now we are talking about social services so that teachers can teach and so that schools can function. And I find that a priority. It's just a priority. And I think it's really important. I just want to say on the record, I think that's a priority. And in a way, if you look at the agenda, whatever big, wide agenda there is, it's a very ingenious way of getting social services funded because, it's really going to be for the taxpayers to make that decision. I do have very specific questions, but they are more contextual. Like we're looking at 2 drivers and 2 vans for a pre-K program that I don't even know what the pre-K program is. I don't even know, we lost the 2 individual buildings And so I have no idea what we're doing for pre-K. So I have no idea how to think about 2 drivers and 2 vans because I don't even know where the pre-K will be. And are we just adding costs to retain something that's not sustainable, which is what we have now, which is the same conversation we had in April of 2018. So I do have some specific questions, but I think I'd like to ask how the board will get all of its questions answered, because that won't happen in 3 minutes, which I've probably used up by now. So how will the board get all of its questions answered and have meaningful conversations about the budget rather than, why do we need a computer science teacher at the high school?
So I'll take on your question. So thank you, Commissioner Curry. We're all in agreement that yes, a program analysis, a cost analysis, those larger questions, programmatic, and yes, we all agree, and that we've seen over the cuts in those social services that have become, basically school is home for the majority of our children. And so in looking at your question, we are going to ask, this is a work session, so we are going to ask those individual questions to be able to educate ourselves on the need. It might seem redundant or, pulling part piece by piece, but when we look at the process that we inherited from district leadership, I believe last year we looked at the same type of request, and it was put forth by the superintendent, $5.37 million.
I just asked, how will we get all our questions answered? Will we be going around again and doing it 3 minutes per person until all our questions are answered? Or will there be some other format, or is this the format that we'll each can have 3 minutes over and over and over?
Sure, Commissioner Wick, if you'd like to respond.
I agree with you. If 3 minutes, obviously what we're trying to balance here is the strong desire on a number of commissioners' parts, including myself, not to have 6-hour meetings. However, if 6-hour meetings are necessary, I'm in. So what we thought we would do is try to have an orderly process, a fair process, so one commissioner doesn't dominate the conversation over other commissioners, and akin to what's in Robert rules, like it or not, it's intended to make it a fair process. So we figured you can go around, and we said, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Well, let's start with 3 and see how that goes, and then let's give a second round at 1. And what does that all add up to if we let the administrators present for 20?
Yes, we will be going around again. Is that
Yeah,
what
but
we're
you
doing?
don't have to
Okay,
interrupt
thanks.
me. I'm trying to give you, because in your criticism, which is well taken,
I'm just
trying to
asking
give
a
you some
question.
context.
Okay. I just wanted to know if we have
The
another
point is,
opportunity
I
and
would
for how long.
certainly, I would be in favor of going around, or even, if you don't think it's fair that each person gets 3 minutes again and again and again, some other process. But I actually think if we need, and I'm just speaking for myself, if after the 3 minutes and then the 1 minute, we feel unsatisfied, I would suggest we as a board decide if we want to continue again, and maybe gently without this being chaotic, if people think that we need another round of 5 minutes each. But ultimately, it's got to be fair. One person can't take all the air in the room.
And I think.
Thank you for answering the question.
All right.
That's all I wanted to know.
Thanks.
Really.
And the goal was, based on past presentations, that we were spoken to, receiving the information, but it didn't allow for this type of discourse. So we have changed it from last year to be able to ask those questions rather than, oh no, they left and we wanted to follow up. So thank you for Commissioner Wick for clarifying it. And again, we're open to, offering more time, but we felt that, again, we're very appreciative of our district leaders being here tonight, and we thought the questions, answering our questions would allow us that education.
Can I ask a process question? So is this structure that you guys are talking about, this 3-minute go around, obviously you've thought it out. Did you write it down? Are we going to follow that from here on in with this process?
So can I answer? We have done this, I think at the prior year budget session, we did a similar kind of round robin. And so we have written it down just for this meeting, and we're open to suggestions. But my suggestion right now is let's focus, we have the administrators here. Let's continue with this process. And if a board member wants to make a motion to change the process, of course, they're open to do that. So, Commissioner,
I just want to know the process.
so the process is, we had 40-minute time box for questions for administrators with a round of 3-minute each, and then a bonus round of 1 minute each. That's what we put forward.
Great.
So Commissioner Wick, Commissioner Wool, would either one of you like to?
Yep, Commissioner Wick.
Oh, thank you, Chair Wool. Here's my thought. My thoughts. My thoughts are, if you look at Nathan's memo, which I'm grateful for, Nathan, thank you. It tells me essentially that if we make none of these additions, we predict a roughly 3 to 4% dollar increase in our budget. And I'm stating something that may be obvious, so forgive me, but I think it's important. If we make all of the additions, which I would love to make, I mean, in a perfect world, if there were no consequences, we ought to do this. But that's 4.4 million, which equates to another 5% increase, or 4.89. So I'm just rounding up 4.9. Then I thought I'll round up to 5 because it's an easy number. So 4% in doing nothing plus 5% in doing everything is a 9% increase. I think we all recognize that no matter what the tax effect is due to the weird state formulas that we have that fund our education, that's, in my opinion, not a budget increase we can pass with a straight face and ask our taxpayers. So my suggestion would be, on the part of the administrators from the superintendent on down, and this is just a suggestion, that each cohort, you know, I see it divided up into a number of cohorts, elementary, middle, high school, et cetera. If it's not too much to ask, in a perfect world, that I appreciate that you just said that those are rank ordered. So maybe that's the answer. But in a world where we can't do everything, there might be 3 scenarios. One where it's everything. The other is the middle ground, less than everything. And the other is quite a bit less than everything, but something. And I'd rather have that decision come from you all than us, somewhat arbitrarily. So I'm just wondering, because time is ultimately short, within the next week or two, if people could actually think about 3 scenarios of this spreadsheet that would get us down to probably more where we're going to end up, sadly, because I just don't see a huge increase like this passing without, I don't know, it would be fiscally prudent. So that's a comment I have. I would also suggest to the board members, and I do not believe this is out of line at all, but there are different philosophies around this board table, that if there are strategic or even programmatic, or call it operational, things that you'd like to see, now is the time to alert the group, just like the administrators have done. If the board has stuff, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I have something that I've been researching. I'm not done researching. I'm concerned that we may need another full-time equivalent high school science teacher because of the change in sequence of the high school science program. Within about 2 years, I foresee that the ability for high school students to take AP science classes is going to go down to about nothing. And I'm not going to get into that now because I hear the duck over there. But I do think that that needs to be addressed now, given that it's budget season. Otherwise, we're out 1.5 years. Thank you, Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Chair Wool?
You
Or you
can
want me to
go
go?
ahead.
Sure. Oh, it's timer on myself. Thank you all for coming out and spending time. In terms of ideas from board members, one thing that I did come up with a while ago is around an IT security audit. I'm an IT guy, and I know how important it is to safeguard our data and how easy it is to get access. I've been in communication with Director Lavery and a vendor that I'm aware of, and we're going to try and get a budgetary estimate. So I think that's a pretty strong need. The other question I had, I'm not sure who to address this with, but the BHS Booster Club came to us a number of months ago about a number of things that they fund. And I saw that there was one, and so I wanted to see whether those asks made it in here. I saw a half position, what was it, half position athletic
Director to full-time.
I think it came from high school related athletics, actually three. One is the biggest piece is the athletic assistant, making that a full-time role. That role currently also does kind of like hall monitoring work and that sort of thing. So we essentially still need the monitoring capacity. So what is listed on the sheet is a little confusing because it's really the cost of devoting all of that time to the athletic work means we're kind of backfilling more than just kind of a half-time hall monitor. So it's a little confusing, but the point is that's one piece, bringing the athletic assistant to full time. Then there's also a $10,000 request to make money available for emerging sports and adjustments to coaching. And we've had a couple of these issues come up in the past related to bowling, ultimate frisbee, that sort of thing, where kind of in the middle of the season, or maybe not in the middle of the season, but toward when the season was about to begin, it was like, oh, we've got enough kids, we want to field this team, and we haven't created a budget for that because it hasn't been part of the program in the past. So there's some money in there to support the emerging sports. And then the last thing was to increase the availability of athletic trainer services.
Thank you, Director Lowry. Question about the kindergarten parish. So I remember this came up years ago before I was on the board, and the board decided to make a big investment last year and say, okay, cohort of kindergarten paras. What's the feedback before we start talking about adding in more? So my first question is, were we able to fill all those positions? Because there was concern, and how can we find out their effectiveness, whether they did have the impact that we thought that they would have?
I can just speak anecdotally to what the principals have shared, and a few of the teachers that I've spoken with, is that it has been working. It's a start. It's just not the complete vision we had when we came last year asking for one per classroom, obviously because of the cost. And so the challenge is not having a full-time person per classroom. When it's all built on relationships and teaching behavior and teaching the expectations of the school, it's really challenging when a student's struggling and the teacher's with the 1 to 20 ratio, just to give that example, and they have the para, and then the para has to leave, say, to go to the other classroom at that point. I'm thinking of the schools where they have all shared. There's some schools that have 3 classrooms and maybe 2 paras, or one that's got 2 classrooms and 1 para between. And so across the board, anecdotally, I don't have specific data that it has been effective, but it's a start, and really to make it 100% effective of what we wanted and envisioned, we really need the ratio to be cut, which is a 1 to 10 ratio, which is what we were hoping for, so that the teacher could really have this person as a supportive person in the class.
Can I add to that, though? The reality is that we haven't filled all those positions. There are vacancies. So even though we provide staff with, here, you can have these extra bodies, there are vacancies today that are still, so we necessarily can fill those positions that we provide. So that's still a challenge in terms of moving forward.
Thank you. We'll call time on myself. Chair Wolf?
Thank you. Thank you again for being here. I greatly appreciate this list and your work and the work that's been done. I guess I wanted to ask about the high school. Superintendent O'Bang, for any questions regarding the high school, will Noel or someone be there next?
Yeah, we have staff here that can respond to that.
High school? Okay,
Yeah.
so I can speak. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry. I was thinking
Yeah.
of it. So I know that our enrollment, similar to the bubble that's happening at the middle school and your students, it has been brought to our attention. This graduating class, the seniors are 210 roughly. We have our incoming freshman class at 260. This incoming next year 8th grade class at 260. The high school will be looking at, if we don't change anything in the contract and what teachers are teaching, the need for a computer science teacher. I just wanted to find out, and also a social studies teacher, to be able to meet the demands of those incoming large 9th grade classes over the next 2 years, 3 years here at the high school. And again, noting last night at the Seahorse Pride meeting, the assistant athletic director wanting to go full-time, the increase 80% or 20% increase in those needs and student participation. And so, again, at the middle school level, is your staffing adequate as far as core teachers? Or do you feel with your, if you call them, I know you're mods, but exploratories, like, are there enough teachers at the middle school serving you and Meg?
So, again, dream list.
Yeah.
If we if we could get another unified art teacher, that would be incredible. Currently, we have 60 kids in PE. Our design and tech classes are capped at 20 due to being in the shop, so that then have overflow into other classrooms. Our French class has 26 to 28 students in the world language class, and all our other classes are between 23 and 28 students. And also middle school, having another teacher would allow more choice for middle school students as well. Just to speak to what Noel, I've heard Noel say, is the high school has a lot of piecemeal positions where it's 0.8 or 0.7, and Noel would like to have the equity of having full positions at the high school. Sometimes if those employees leave, it's really difficult to fill a 0.7 position. So that's what I can speak about with him wanting those 0.2 positions.
And then special ed, I know, Laura, we had spoken, and Tracy Rubin had asked about special ed offerings for our special ed students here at the high school that are looking for core classes, 45-minute classes. Right now, there are only 2 type of classes that they can attend, and that was an equity concern. And when I look here on this special ed, again, you know, those are BHS teachers that would be teaching that class. So I just wanted to make sure that your department is speaking with Noel, and if there is those 0.6 teachers that could potentially round out their schedule to serve those special ed students in those core academic classes, or introduce them to, that we're doing that, or that you're cognizant, you know, or letting us know where those would fall in the budget. So not adding a whole nother person, but if someone's here, like the Sharon Weltman, or, you know, I know those are some grant-funded positions, but I know that has been a high priority for special ed.
So that's an interesting component of why a lot of times shoring things up within the general ed community supports the special ed community, which of course they're all our students. And I can say that we are struggling with providing art and PE for our alternative programs, and we haven't been able to participate in what's offered at BHS despite the proximity, because there just isn't time or availability for those classes and teachers. So there's that component as well. The special ed department at the high school struggles with adult transition work, which is required by federal law and state law, which is a component that we really are required to work on this year, in the next couple of years. And that is also hampered by the lack of those types of classes and the remedial, I don't know if I want to say remedial exactly, but things that aren't quite high school but aren't quite not high school. You know, the transitional services. So what we don't want to have happen is have a special educator who doesn't have any kind of training in math, teaching math to kids with disabilities. That's not what I would like to see happen. We've done that before. We know that doesn't work really, really well. But what I would love to see is content specialists working with our most challenged students as well. And again, as I said, bolstering the high school and the middle schools, teachers that are 0.5s and bringing them to full-time positions may go a long way to supporting our kids with disabilities too.
Thank you. Okay, so just to recap, we've gone through one round of questions. It took 45 minutes with all of the sidebars as well. We have at least, by my calculations and our estimates, at least another 45 minutes of materials after the budget session. So my suggestion is that if we do a second round of 2 minutes, I'm sorry, if we do a second round of 3 minutes, I believe we can get out of here by 9:30. So unless there's any objections, we'll do a second round of 3 minutes per commissioner.
Great.
Okay. I can go in order, same order, or if anybody's really pressing and wants to start, I'll take a hand. If not, Commissioner Carey. I'll start.
So I just have a question of process, and that is, to what extent were the teachers involved in gathering this information? And have they been informed or seen this list at this point, and do they approve?
I can say that at the elementary level, we had a process that was outlined that we would bring it to staff meeting, talk about it with our staff, and then what I did is then brought my staff feedback to my group. My staff understood that we were really looking at not specific asks maybe for only early ed, but that we really wanted to support our kids as they were transitioning to kindergarten. So that's kind of what the process with my staff. They had other requests as well, but felt like when we went through the process of eliminating that, they felt like it made sense to be system-wide thinking as far as supporting kids as they went into the elementary school.
So my staff, we've been discussing this in leadership and also just around needing that one extra teacher, just going around to different staff who work with certain students to ask if that's a need for that program. Again, we're wanting to really have a smaller program within our school.
I collected specific feedback from the high school EL staff and more general feedback from the elementary and middle school EL staff. It depended on the items. For example, the native language paraprofessionals I discussed really thoroughly with everybody. The math, EL math teacher for the high school I discussed with the high school folks, and support for students at the middle school and high school levels I discussed by academic language coaching. I discussed with the folks at those two levels. So there were 5 items on my wish list. I discussed them with the kind of appropriate folks for each one. And in some cases, those folks are the ones who generated the ideas.
So, I think I enjoy a fairly close relationship with the special educators in the district and the psychologists, SLPs, and what they have said this year is not an exception, is that a great deal of the services that they provide are interrupted by extreme behaviors and being called out to support kids with and without disabilities who are in need of someone to step in. The special ed staff has struggled with compliance as required by state and federal law because the time that it takes to do the paperwork for special ed is pretty significant, and it takes a lot of your brain to concentrate on that while you're doing it to do a good job. And dealing with behaviors, and they want to be with the kids more than they want to do the paperwork, no question, but the behaviors that interrupt them doing the work they need to do and providing services, as I said, the paperwork, it's been an impediment, and that's why I've been supporting these requests.
Thank you.
Does that make any sense?
Commissioner Carey?
Another question?
No.
No.
Oh, too bad. That was my 2 minutes.
Agree. Next.
I'll go.
Okay.
A clarifying question. So Commissioner Curry, I just wanted to bring back the question you thought, just to address, and we'll talk after the meeting. I can address any pre-K questions that you have, and as well with the board. But you had talked about the buses, 2 vans, 2 drivers. Were you concerned that that was a pre-K request, or is that a facilities, property services? Was the bus 2 vans, 2 drivers? Was a property services request? Just a point of clarification.
To me, it looks like a programmatic request.
That's not specifically for preschool. It's my understanding that's to have is it north to south bus, I believe? I'm not sure. It's not preschool.
It's just demand driven, and essentially the idea there is that as the need for providing that transportation has increased, we find ourselves taxed in not just in terms of the capacity, but in terms of the duration of the rides for those students. So part of what I discussed with Marty around this option was whether or not we would actually have those drivers driving like regular routes, or whether we would actually move to us essentially like a model where we have perhaps a few additional drivers but smaller vehicles, so that the duration of the rides is more reasonable. So you might have a few more options, and also having smaller but more drivers allows us to be more flexible in how the routes are designed. So that's really what is kind of the genesis for that request.
So it came from pre-K?
It
Or
came
it
from
came
the,
from
we
Marty?
put it under property services. I mean, I discussed it with Marty. It's based on the need so that transportation is coordinated through property services. They're serving many of the students that show up at in Stacy's programs.
Right, so it's a current concern that has been a concern getting to IRA.
Yes, I didn't specifically list it under our elementary team, because again, there was bigger things that we were asking for, but it's been a challenge for a long time. Regulations say that preschoolers shouldn't be on the bus for more than 45 minutes. We have children on the bus much longer than that. Children fall asleep on the bus. Parents don't want them getting home after dark, so we have adjusted even hours for kids, and it's been pretty taxing on Marty as well as finding drivers. So I think that's where the current need came from, but I didn't specifically list it in my elementary team meetings because there were so many other bigger issues that we wanted.
Thanks for that clarification. Next was, I know Z is here, but I just had human resource questions, which I'll ask in rounding out that staff. But since here, library, thank you very much for the work. And we, as you see, over the last 2 months, this board was concerned, as it was brought to our attention by library staff. When you, and I know Shannon is here from BHS Library as well, when your budgets are under the principal discretionary fund, and those principals come to you in a difficult situation and over the past couple of years have had to take from your fund, have they shared, and it's not to put Maddie in the awkward spot, but because I think we're all a team and we're collaborative, and they're saying, I'm just sorry, I need to take $3,000 out of your library budget for, and again, understanding, and we'll go down that road, we understand where this board would love to be able to identify a set budget that doesn't get taken, pulled out of for other needs, because we see you are the epicenter of every school, and so we see your work. But is there anything you can speak to? Your presentation, it was great to see visually, and to see that it wasn't, this board originally went down the road of like 8,000 or 10,000 for every library, and that's it, and it didn't really make sense. We had some conflict among the board to be able to identify what each school would potentially need per pupil and their needs. But my question is, in looking at the budgets that you proposed and seeing some are nominal increases and some are drastic, were there libraries that we didn't address, or like a BHS that is grossly underfunded, and that in the listing of like elementary school, middle, and high school, is there any, I guess, ranking order to say, because we as a board didn't address the high school and the middle schools at that time. We only addressed the elementary schools. So I want to draw attention to those 3 schools and their needs.
Thank you. I think it was really good for us to work with our elementary colleagues and use the same process to start thinking about our program. But the high school, for example, that you bring up, that, looking at much less compared to even if you put the 2 middle schools together, and knowing that they serve all of our students, including the 2 alternative programs. And so I haven't been in a position where I've had library money taken away for another reason. I've been, I guess, lucky in that way. And I don't know if other people have. I hear anecdotally over time that has happened. What's important, I think, for us to think about was we did rank sort of our personal choices, and we did say to our principals, well, this would be the most important right now, and maybe if we start looking at this 1, 2, 3 years, because we know even for some of the elementary programs, they can't fix all that with one-time money.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Commissioner Pillsbury.
Yes, I'm gonna get a little snarky. I'm not surprised about this. It's just I'm very used to this kind of a list, and it's just very hard for me to figure out what you need. But I go back to 2015 when the interim superintendent said he needed 2% in order to run the schools, and the board at that point compromised between 1.5 and 2, and they went to 1.75. And the second year, 2016, the superintendent came to Ward 1, where I was, and you said you probably should be asking for more, but you said you weren't going to. And the people that quickly figured out we were losing 18 teachers overall staff. And I'm just wondering is what we have now a result of where people looked at the budget rather than looking at the needs of our students? I'm just, that's what I'm thinking about. Sometimes those budgets really probably have created some of the crisis that we seem to have here. I understand, because I was a teacher, I guess, I understand what all these are. I just have to figure out what is the point where people will say it's too much, and what's the point where we're failing our students if we don't implement or put in place some of these positions. So that's where I'm at right now. There's a lot of concerns about some of the lack of support for our students as I go around talking to my constituents, and lack of some of that, but they still support our system, so they're willing to, they're loyal, they support, but they want us to make sure we make good decisions. And I think the most important thing is, as they told me last night, make sure that the students get the services that they need. That is the most important thing, because we're going to be paying later on if they don't, if they fail. So this, what we're talking about now is really what is the real needs of our students, and were some mistakes made earlier on that we reduced faculty a larger number than we probably should have, and now we're trying to recoup some of that and make sure that our students get the service, and that's where I'm at. And this is not anything new to me, or I don't sense it's new. It's just got to figure out what it is we can afford, and also what it is, who's going to be the least hurt. But one of the things we never talk about are things that maybe we don't need to have anymore or do anymore. And that's what really makes me, and people who vote the taxes get annoyed, is that you add but you never take away. And that's the thing the duck is telling me to shut up, so I'll do it.
I believe the duck said, thank you, Commissioner Pillsbury, for your thoughts.
I did want to, I know I didn't get to say this on my first round, but I did want to thank you all for coming here and answering our questions, and also for taking the time to come up with this list. I think it's good to see our district employees to be collaboratively working together and seeing what you can come up with. At the same time, I have some questions, and I just want to make sure I get to all my questions. There's a big money ask, $350,000 for alternatives to suspension, and alternative. So it would be good to, and I know Sparks is not here tonight, but it would be good to hear a presentation on that and why do we feel that that's effective. And then I see, and I'm not a specialist working in schools. Like for the middle schools, the ask is for 2 teachers for behavior programs, 2 social workers, and then alternatively from special ed, there's an ask for a behavior specialist. And I believe like the behavior specialist is for immediate needs dealing with students' behavior, while perhaps a teacher is more like instructing students on how to behave or what to expect. Although I need to have time for one more question after that.
To make it very short, we currently have a behavior interventionist in our school, and 95% of his work is preventative work. So all the teachers, we have team meetings. They're non-IEP students for the most part, and there are students who the team has identified needs some type of plan, whether they need a break or they might need to do something in the STEAM lab one day a week. So it's really looking at the student as a whole and doing preventative work with those students. And we've seen a lot of change within the building around meeting those students' needs. So that's how we're using it as a preventative. And a lot of the pieces that I'm asking for, or the middle schools, is really around the preventative. So we're not drinking out of the fire hose all the time. And when we really are meeting the needs of all our students, then the learning can happen.
And then last but not least, and I don't even see this on the list, but it's become evident today, and what Commissioner Wick said, is that we do need science teachers at the high school. Our students need the opportunity to be able to take AP Science before they're done with high school. I think it's really important for their education and for our students to be competitive out in the world. I would believe that some of the smarter school districts are ensuring that their students get the science education that they need before they move on to college or a technical school kind of situation. So I do see a computer science request here, but not a science teacher.
I believe currently there are AP courses at the high school, and I think what Mr. Wick was looking at was for future, looking in the future.
Meaning with the switch to the course sequence where you put earth science in 9th grade, unless you double up, you never get really to an AP course. And I won't get into it all right now, and I'm happy to talk with anyone, and I'm still investigating it with local other school districts to see how they're handling it, and I have some answers, but.
Commissioner Curry?
Was that a suggestion to add to the list, is that what you're saying? Add a science teacher to the list, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, depending on.
You want to add another?
Or like have an explanation of how it works, since I don't, it's been quite a while since I was in high school. But I am a scientist, so I do feel that that's important for our district's children.
So Superintendent Obeng, I think there's been some offline discussion about the current way that science courses are programmed in high school, that there's, as Commissioner Wick said, and unless a student doubles up, that they wouldn't progress to the point where they could take AP science courses later on in their career. So any information that you and Principal Green can provide offline before next week, I think would be helpful. Commissioner Curry.
Thanks. I guess I'd appreciate kind of some structural recommendations that address many of these costs. So for example, could we have data on ratios between high school enrollment and teachers for each year of the past 5 years by department, so we understand better how the requested teaching staff positions compare to prior years? Would different scheduling configuration address? Well, I don't want answers. I just want to ask these questions for 3 minutes because I need context. There's structural problems we have, and I see a lot of these positions as trying to solve structural problems, so I'm wondering if we could have structural context. So is it a scheduling configuration that would solve these individual teaching positions? Somebody mentioned that the high school principal identified like having 0.2 positions here and there. Is there a structural approach that we need to take to reconfigure it and address some of these needs, and what would that be? I do have some specific questions about SA. Could you discuss, I don't know if Victor's still here, the consequence of going to individual grades in terms of the school size and what that would do to the classroom size and the ratios? Because I understand in the past we've ended up with like 2 classrooms and then 5 or 6 kids left over. And so I'd like to understand the impact of going to single grades.
We can get you the numbers. I don't know them specifically, and I don't want to waste your time, but we did specifically talk about how it was an inequity within our elementary schools. That SA was one of the only schools that didn't have straight level grades, and that's why we all agreed pretty across unanimously that that needed to happen.
So I'd like to understand the impact of that on, do we have enough teaching staff? Does that mean we'd need more teaching staff? Does that create another cost?
Yes, that's in but they were requesting, I think, 2 teachers for.
But would that solve the problem? Would that be like, okay, now we're, at 175 or 179 kids, that's going to solve the problem?
You want the ratio per class, is that what you mean?
They've asked for that.
Yeah, I want to know that we're not going to end up with like 5 or 6 kids stranded
Sure.
that don't form another class, and then that's how kind of we got into the problem.
Okay. I can
And then why don't we use Howard instead of hiring social workers and individual? We're adding, by hiring social workers, we're adding to the baseline salary and benefits cost of the district every time we add a social worker. In the past, we've had contract with Howard, and now I see we're like completely reversing that. And I'm really concerned about the sustainability of that, so can you talk about that, please?
So there are advantages for both models. The Howard services, we do primarily, right now, have Howard services for our social workers. We only have one employed, full-time employee as a social worker. What has been cited as an advantage to having an employee as a social worker is that they aren't limited to specific caseloads. Howard social workers are required to work with kids who are Medicaid eligible, for example, and if they're not eligible to be on their caseload, then because the cost is reduced to us because of the reimbursement rate that they get in their when they submit their work. So. And also the caseload is smaller. 13 is the caseload that the Howard social worker can.
But why can't we just pay them?
Because then it would cost about the same. I mean, we would.
Salary benefit.
You know, I've never actually. I'd have to find out for sure.
Let's look at the data on that. That's just
But,
adding to a whole salary and benefit compared to contracting with Howard, regardless of what Medicaid will pay for, just contracting hours. That's what we used to do. So we have the data somewhere.
Right. I mean, I can look into it and see what would be interesting to know, but
Yeah.
I'm assuming that they're paying salary and benefits too, but I'll find out. Yep.
It's a different structure.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Wick?
Oh, thanks. A couple things. One, I would like to express my support in general for the library budget presentation, and if our library system throughout the district is asking for a total addition of less than $19,000 to satisfy their library budget needs, to me that's extremely, I'm pleasantly surprised that's so modest. To me that's almost a no-brainer if that's what the librarians collectively have decided they'd like, especially given the many years of stagnant budget. So I'm just expressing a view that that sounds like an easy decision. It's so modest relative to other big numbers we're looking at. So that was one point. Another is, I wonder, in the interest of making sure the entire board has a voice in the budgeting process, whether we might consider allowing everyone an brief opportunity, if they wish, to speak up, maybe go around and give some input. I think Commissioner Curry, for example, I'm glad, said, how are we doing this, and here's how it might be better. Well, you didn't say that here's how it might be better, but love to hear some feedback rather than sort of back channel, private talk, if anyone's got it, so that we can adjust in real time, perhaps as soon as next week, so that everyone feels like they've gotten input into this process. We're just trying to do the best when we come up with procedures to get there. So it's not as though we think we've got the right answer. So that would be something I'd suggest of the chair, if after this we just allow everyone a brief opportunity to voice that. And then finally, if the duck doesn't go off here, one other thing I am kind of thinking directionally, if we can't fund everything, obviously I said earlier that it would be great to get kind of 3 levels of funding from the administrators, but if we weren't able to get that, it to some degree gives them a lot of deference if we were just to say, well, we can't do 500,000, for this cohort, but we could probably do, whatever it is, 200 or 250 or 300, and then they ultimately decide how to allocate that among their resources. But I would certainly still love, if possible, their 3 scenarios. And then, just since the duck hasn't gone off yet, yeah, I think that's it for now. I'm not done with my thinking, but for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Okay, I'll call my own number. So to follow up on the question about SA, Director Curtis, is there facilities, is there classroom space to add those classes at the school without impacting other services like early ed?
We didn't talk about that. She didn't say that we were gonna get rid of early ed, but we didn't talk about where the 2 classrooms would go. I believe she said that there is going to be lower numbers in one of the grades so that it could happen. But she knew that she wanted to have straight grade levels, and I don't know where those numbers were.
Yeah, there are limited in classrooms in our co-teaching model in terms of having 2 teachers supporting just very little space at SA at this point.
Okay, thank you. I know a number of parents brought this forward. Was there any discussion about foreign language at elementary and middle school?
Not in our elementary group, no.
Okay.
Good question.
We've been discussing moving to Spanish and French. So one teacher who's duly certified, so students have choice what language they're speaking. We know the model we're currently doing is not meeting the needs of the students nor the high school's language program. And with the cuts over the past years, the language exposes students to language, but does not set them up to be going into French 2 into the high school or Spanish 2 into the high school.
Okay, but clearly it didn't rise to the level that it made it onto the proposal, right?
Correct. It didn't, because we had been looking at this other option where it was cost neutral.
Okay, thank you. And I think this speaks to what Commissioner Pillsbury was talking about around needs of the students. And I've been doing budgeting for years, and there's needs and wants. And in corporations, there's needs and wants. And what's hard here is that all of these are compelling reasons, and they could all be considered needs, right? For one kid, one student, one family, it's a huge need. And so it's really hard for us to prioritize those needs. And so I thank Commissioner Pillsbury for resetting that and just reminding us that it's that's what's driving it. But it is our responsibility to gauge with your assistance about which of these gets the biggest bang for the buck. Which needs can we get the most value from or address the most with the least amount of dollars? Because we are limited in what the public is willing to fund. What that limit is, nobody really knows until they vote. So I also appreciate Commissioner Pillsbury, and I think it's a great idea. I would second that we ask Superintendent Obang for you and your staff next week to come back with, you've come up with a huge list of additions. And in prior years, you've come up with suggested reductions. And I know the story about how much has come out of the central office. But I'm really curious are there things that we've put in place over the last few years that have not been as effective as we thought that they would be? And are not giving us that benefit for the dollars that some of these proposed additions would. So I'm asking you to come back next week with some proposals for the board.
Yeah, we struggled with this process because I think the board has given us some indications in terms of what they wanted. So this approach has been presented in terms of what the board has done throughout the course of the year, in terms of what we felt. I wanted to just give you a glance. This is the slides from similar to previous. Can I move this?
You have to do, yeah, you have to.
Oh my gosh,
I know.
can't do it.
Where do you want to go?
I want to go down. But I want to be able to move it quickly. Can I do that? No, up, sorry.
To where?
Just right to the top. But can I move it down? You have to slide down. Okay, slide. So this is last year, slide down. And just go right through, Yeah, keep going. So the approach that we used in the past years, we've done a lot of conversations around philosophically in terms of what are the needs and what are the wants. And I think we've done a really good job of working with staff saying, yes, you know what, you can't have everything, but what is it that you really need? And how do you identify what the priorities are, right? And how do we align with our strategic plan and our vision, right? And so, keep going. So we would lay out some of those objectives, keep going, assumptions, go back. And if you remember even last year, go back up one more. we had a conversation, because we worked with staff to identify what were the criteria. So I think that's what the board is looking for. What is the criteria you're gonna use to make decisions? And we came up with these criteria for us, as staff, in terms of, these are the things that we're gonna support in the budget. So come up with your wish list, but we're only gonna identify the things that match with these areas, right? So keep going. And then last year, we started with, see there, we started with about $5.3 million of stuff, the wish list. And we said, obviously, we're not gonna get that, right? And then continue on. And then we aligned the priorities that we had. We spent weeks and weeks and weeks talking about what the priorities are. And we aligned it with our strategic goals. So these are the goals that we established with the community 3 or 4 years ago that we felt was important. So anything we're gonna support should align with that. And then we drilled down on the list and came up with these items that fit into these categories. Keep going. And then and you notice we had a couple, go back, just an example. We had a category, keep going, one more, that was other. These were things that people felt were important but didn't fit with our priorities. But we displayed it regardless so people could know that we were honoring those pieces. Keep going. And so we went through each category, each one of the goal areas, and that's how we displayed it. So staff had done extensive work around philosophy, what the essential needs were, and then we're able to lay down what they specifically wanted. And if I would have showed the other slide, I'm not going to, the presentation before was around rationale. So we talked about, okay, we're talking about social emotional issues. Why is that? And we had a rationale, and we had staff speak to that, and we said, this is why we think a focus on social emotional behavior issues is critical to us, because we're seeing this in our schools, we're seeing this. And we went through that approach. We presented that budget. Then we had, the board had a conversation around drilling down in terms of these areas, and went through a process and eventually came up with something. Then the board had to identify if you'll see in the other slides, keep going down in future slides, we gave you some metrics around, go back one more, around tax impact and numbers and increase to budgets. And so the board had to have that conversation. What is their risk appetite to go to the community, right? Because we need that guidance to continue, because everything is important. But we have to do that. Keep going. And keep going. Gave you some more of those pieces. And then that's how we continuously develop. We didn't present it in this fashion this year because of the information that we got from communications and the resolutions we received from the board said to the staff, okay, let's just look at the things that we need and put that forward, and then have the board give us direction in terms of, okay, you know what, we really think that science is important. Include that in there. We really think that, because we noticed that when we did our budget presentation, after the budget, the board still added things on it. We had to come back and say, we need to add this, need to add that. So we said, okay, why would we go through all that and then have the board tell us something different? So let's just give the information, and then have the board have a conversation, and the board can give us direction, and that'll inform our budget in terms of what the threshold for impact is, and what the philosophy around the areas that we've identified, right? And then we'll finally get to some place that the board is comfortable with approving, because the board has to go out and communicate that and sell it to the community, right? Realistically, I know every year, I have never done a budget in any organization that I didn't ask an administrator and they said, I'm good. There's nothing else I need. If I ask any one of these administrators, do you need something for your school? They're gonna say yes. I think the questions you were asking were good, but sometimes they become in a vacuum. If I ask a principal and I say, do you need more support around French classes? They're gonna say yes. Do you need more support around class instruction? They're gonna say yes. But when I said, okay, what's your most urgent need? If you need one thing, what is it that you're most gonna need? Then they're gonna have to kind of push a little bit and say, well, actually, what I really need is a behavior support, even though I asked for those other things. And that's what usually I would go through a process and bring that and say, these are the things that we've wrestled with staff, and we can't have it all, but we think that this fits with our strategic plan, our vision, and it also comports to what you're contributing to, right? So we've taken a little different approach this year in terms of just being really transparent and just saying, okay, this is what everybody wants. We've started from the Director Lavery sent a memo to all principals and directors and said, start with your staff and make sure you get information from your staff. Staff are gonna say, this is what we need for our classrooms, this is what we need for our schools, and then they started to drill it up. So that's what we're starting from. From my perspective, I don't think, I never thought that we're gonna approve a budget that has 4.5 million increase. I would hope that the board would come up with some criteria around how they're gonna make decisions around that, give us some direction, and then we can continue to give you information till you get to a place where you feel comfortable that you need to do that. I don't think it really, I think it's a waste of time to talk about, well, we took this away 4 years ago and this and all that, because it's really about what the needs are right now. If you were to look at our budget now and our enrollment numbers, our budget has probably, it has increased over the last 4 years. I know that for sure. Our enrollment has stayed pretty much the same. So that tells you something, right? If enrollment's staying the same and our budget's increasing, then are we doing something different, or are we not, or do we need more, or what? So those are all conversations. And those are all things that we would hope that the board would do that analysis and give us direction. And just say, okay, you have an issue about behavior and stuff like that. We think we can only afford to give you, $300,000, but you have to come up with some creative ways to utilize those resources, right? It may not just be adding the same resources we have, because they may not be the right strategy. So I kind of wanted to show you that in terms of what we've done. And so we've kind of done, we're trying to meet the demands of the board based on what we've heard from the board. And we have these staff members who are here to kind of respond to some of the granular questions. But from my perspective, if you're looking at systemically, I don't think it's the granular stuff, like whether if it's how you're implementing a 0.5 or this, that's a conversation you can have for context, but you have bigger decisions to make. So I think you really need to look at what the criteria you're going to use to make the decision, and then give it to us, and then we'll be able to give you the drilled down pieces so you can make those decisions around that. Okay? I don't know if that helps, or, because I had one of the things we will definitely do if we don't, Director Lavery and I were waiting to hear some specific information we needed, but we thought we wanted to give the board an opportunity to continue their conversations and hear what they have to say. But at some point, there will be questions that we haven't heard that are not answered. We might say, okay, we need an answer on this and this and this in order to move forward that maybe you haven't thought of. But we thought that would come out in the conversations, give an opportunity for people to get into it.
Thank you, Superintendent. Commissioner Sowers.
Thank you for that explanation, and I know this is my first year doing the budget process, so I'm a newbie, but that being said, I feel like it's almost backwards. Like, I feel like we should be getting the information that we need to make these high-level decisions. And so operationally, like what I would love to see in an ideal world is that we take a lot of time. We take the time between like this budget and the next budget. We have meetings that are innovative and creative at each school, and saying like, what is it that we need? What are our greatest needs? And when they're saying these needs, and we all know that they exist. So what is the best way to handle these needs? Should we tap Howard? Should we tap outside resources? How is space involved? Are we gonna need to change course sequencing? I feel like to say this is the current need of this year right now is to take away the bigger picture. And so what I would love to see in the future is a big picture discussion at each school. Here's how we're gonna work things. Here's what we need this year, but here's what we can take away, and here's how we're gonna work things a little bit differently in order to create better behavior in school or our goals here. So it's hard for us. You're right. This is nitty-gritty stuff, and I kind of feel like you guys have more knowledge than we do. We have to think about the budget, and we have to make these high-level decisions, but I would hope that those discussions about ratios and decision-making has already come, and you come to us with saying, like, this is the list that we have to have, and here's what we're doing differently, and here's what we're taking away. You know 5 million is not sustainable, so what am I supposed to do with this list? I'm sitting here struggling, because yes, I would like to give you everything, but we can't.
And that's a reality that we can't have everything, we know that. And we have taken, if you notice, the 3 goal areas, our strategic plan, we use them every year. That's our focus. We don't change them. So and even last year, when we had the board, we talked about a multi-year budget, right? So the things that we did last year, there were things that are left over that we expected to carry over for this year. But we didn't get that impression in terms of what the priorities were. So we didn't say, okay, well, remember, because that's how Director Lavery and I actually started our budget process this summer. We said, okay, what did we do last year and what fell off, right? And we should bring that back in terms, and we had conversations with our staff too and said, remember last year we said we were going to do 9 special educators and we only did 3, right? So realistically, this year should be the next 3 or the next 4 or the next 6, right? But it hasn't taken that sort of systemic approach, right? We're kind of, someone talked about adding a health teacher or a science teacher or something like that. So I would say, okay, your question is right. Where's the rationale for that? How would you know? I kind of feel for the board because how would you know? Like, how can you make a decision based on that? You wouldn't know, right? That would be for staff to say, yes, you know what? This is how we're delivering our science program. And yes, we're having this. The board can certainly say, we want to ensure that we offer holistic science programs that students have access to all the types of AP programming, and X, Y, Z. And then that gives staff some direction, say, do we have that? Is it, and there's all kinds of reasons why you put things. I think Commissioner Fisher asked a really good question around the SA piece, right? Because there are other factors, right? Yeah, you want to add another teacher, add 2 more teachers, but there's no space for it, right? And someone talked about the paras thing. We keep adding the paras, but we have vacancies all over. So principals are saying, well, they can't, here's another para to solve your issue, but they can't get them. So there's a point where you got to stop and say, okay, we must maybe try to do something different because we're not going to get that same resource that we think is the answer. So those are the conversations. And I would have, I always think budget works, especially at this early stages, works better in a budget workshop, right? And we did some of that last year, right? Where we had a chance to actually sit in groups, ask the big questions, talk about what are the needs, look, because I think I remember last year when we brought our priorities, we had a chance to talk about them in groups and have board members speak to it and say, yeah, we agree. And then that's where, because that helps you once you get to the level of making decisions, then you have something to go back to. It's like, okay, this is our criteria, this is what we've talked about. I didn't understand a little bit about that intervention criteria, what does that mean? And you have that. It's really difficult for you to have a budget process in this format, right? Just looking at a list of things and picking, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I don't know how you're going to do this. Like, really, it's really difficult to make an educated guess on all this, right?
I'm going to take a little bit of objection to that. I'm not going to speak because it's not my turn, but I actually think that we did a great job last year. It was still messy. I think what you've done is a great job this year. Budget making is not easy. It's like sausage making, the 2 things you don't want to see being made. I think you're denigrating it a little too much, in my opinion, and I think it is a little messy and it could be improved, but I think we're on the right track here.
I was just doing a comparison based on Commissioner Sauer's comment in terms of different approaches and different, so the final decisions with the board, so you can decide on how you want to.
So I'm going to return to our agenda, and which is for commissioner questions. And so, Commissioner Waltz or Gulick, you haven't spoken, so you pass. Commissioner Gulick? Pass. So we've reached the end of our second round. I do think it's worth reflecting on this process and planning for next week. I don't know whether an open session right now with the work we still have on the agenda and the goal to get out of here at 9:30, whether this is the right venue to do this right now. So I'm going to look to Chair Wool. This is not on the agenda, but what do you think? How do you think we should proceed? Should we go back to our agenda, or should we discuss process around the budget?
Could we take like a straw
poll? And I'm sorry. Additionally, it's 8:30. We said we we're going to take a break, so I would propose that we take a break, however long the chair wishes, and have some discussions and come back and either move forward with the budget discussion or move forward with the agenda.
Great. I think we'll take a 10-minute recess and we will move forward with the agenda. But we can, we'll solicit budget discussions for format for December 17th meeting. But thank you, Superintendent Obeng, for your comments. I just want to address them and what is the board's criteria. Based on our process last year, and again, the appreciation, the board has appreciated the work that went into Director Lavery's and your work in soliciting all the admin together to get this list. This is what we wanted to see. We needed to see this list. Last year, we saw a list like this. We took time to learn about the mission, the vision of the district. We felt that that wasn't the best use of our time going forward because we were a lot of the same individuals, and except for Commissioner Sowers and Waltz. And then we spend time putting stickers on priorities. And that is something that we can do, in the next meeting as well. But looking for the first time for this meeting on these actual individual positions is great. So we greatly needed this information and the document that was shared at the last meeting to go through what those priorities were. So on keeping a tone of sort of positivity and criteria, it was to get the board engaged, to ask those individual questions, to have an open dialogue for the public to see us asking those questions. We don't see a lot of the public coming out, so we do believe the administrators have shown from this list, and it's on public docs, as you know, that they are voicing the needs of the community from this document. I'm very pleased to see that our public is not here, and they have entrusted their principals with this process. So, if we felt that there was a long list of people not feeling that their voice is heard, I find that this process has been beneficial, and the superintendent in the district has done a good job in creating this list and identifying those needs. So we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and go to our agenda. Thank you.
For clarification,
Yep.
so for our guests here, some of whom I know have home obligations, are you expecting them to stick around, or are they dismissed for the evening?
Oh, we're all done? Yeah. I should have said that before we take a break. Thank
But
you.
you're coming back to budget.
We're coming back for
You're not
For
going
the
to
rest of the agenda, but not for the budget.
Oh, not for
the budget says. So thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it. Yeah. Next on the agenda, Commissioner Wick will lead us on item 8, Board Self-Governance.
Thanks, Chair Wall. I think we're still missing, we'll go ahead anyway, of
Yeah.
course, but I think we're missing Kendra?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I just want to, everybody got my email in hopes that maybe I sparked a little interest. We're bringing back 4.7 from the last time when it had been clear to me that we hadn't really given it any thought, and so why waste time on it? But 4.7, governance, investment, that policy you all either have before you or it's available on board docs. I emailed it to you as well. And it just a brief discussion, I hope, will not more than 15 minutes on this one and then 15 minutes on the other one. But the question really is, are we living up to our policy here? Do we even have a board budget? If Nathan comes back, maybe he can tell us. No, he's right there. If we even, I'm not aware if we have a board budget,
Yes,
what
we
we
do.
spent any money on. So maybe we could get a brief overview of that. Nothing in depth, but. So does anyone have any thoughts on governance investment? You've seen some of the prompt questions, which is, have you seen our budget? Have we spent any money? Should we create a budget? It's required by the rule. Are you concerned that if we spend a budget, you feel like we'll be taking away money from students? I mean, these are all honest questions that I kind of asked myself. How much is reasonable? In addition to the meetings we have, should we set up additional meetings or allocate additional time in existing meetings to governance training? You know, we haven't done a lot of that formally. Have you availed yourself of the VSBA's board training seminars? And in addition to the outside auditor, are there any other outside consultants suggested by our policy that we might want to retain, I'm not saying yes, but in quote, exercising confidence in its control over district performance and the board's control. And then finally, how we do in our community outreach mechanisms as required by this rule. I think it was Kendra who sent a very thoughtful email in response to this. And I don't know if you just missed it, but I just went over the question prompts. We're talking about governance investment. Do we want to self-reflect a bit here in a structured way, semi-structured way? I'll sort of, if anyone wants to speak, I'll recognize you and speak. Commissioner Fisher?
Just some real basics to start, and I think you said it, but I didn't hear the answer. Is there money in the budget for board development or board operations?
Mm-hmm.
And there is. I see Director Lavery is making his way
to the podium.
This is a budget of a more manageable size. So there is a budget, and in fact, the accounting structure that we use sets aside a function specifically for essentially governance. That's where we put the money for the board. So that is something that's there. You can actually find that function in our, if you go online to our budget page and you go to our comprehensive line item budget document, and I'll just tell you it's on page 39, so you don't have to search too far, but in there you'll see it says total school board budget, and you'll see within that a bunch of different lines, some of which have funds in it. There's a few kind of routine things that are in there, including like dues for membership as part of VSBA and that sort of thing. But there's also some money that we've budgeted in there for kind of just professional services. So if you hire the trainers who did the recent training, I forget what it's called, but anyway, yes, exactly, the implicit bias training and that sort of thing. So there is a budget in here. You can see what it is for this year, and some of it also supports things like the extra support from Jeff to set up and arrange the space for meetings and that sort of thing. So those money is available. It's modest, but there are activities that can be supported. And per my earlier question, to the extent that there's other things that you want to do or make sure you have the resources to do, then we can easily add to that area of the budget.
Sorry, you said page 39?
It's page 39 of the PDF. It's the document. You'd find it on page 36 is like what's printed on there. The PDF includes like the cover page and that sort of thing. But it's function 2310. It's in the general fund.
Great, thank you.
Those are the old coding, but the same thing exists in our new coding structure. So
thank you, Director Lavery. For everyone else, it was about $35,000 in FY18 actual, $50.5 thousand in 19 budget, and $41,000 proposed for FY20.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts on board governance? Commissioner Sowers.
Well, if you want me to reflect on that quickly on the orientation for new members, my suggestion was just that within a month of a new member joining, to really get a good orientation, because it took me quite a while to even know that where Board Box was, how meetings are supposed to be run, what email lists I should and shouldn't be on. I didn't know any of that, and I realized about halfway through the summer that I was missing a whole bunch of stuff, and I didn't know enough to ask. So I eventually asked, and I met with Mike. Thank you, Mike. But it would be really great to have that orientation for new members, because I feel like I struggled for a little while, and it's needless because you guys all have great information.
Point well taken. Oh, yeah. Chair Will.
Superintendent Bang, is that typically done by the HR department? That training? I know Joe McNeil did the training for the board.
No, not really. Usually the board partners with the VSBA for board orientation, and you get your communication and stuff, and the board has a orientation meeting with their new colleagues and for questions and things like that. That's usually what happens.
I did do the VSBA training, but it was really general. It's not like specific to what our processes are here, so that's great. That's also great to do both.
So I'm thinking, Kendra, that the first year Claire and Mike and others got on the board, we actually did have that training because there were so many new board members. But I think when you got on the board, there were probably so few that we blew it, and you too.
Even do that other training.
Oh,
Yeah. So I will apologize on behalf of the group. That
Right, or that we can implement through HR.
We should do it every year.
An onboarding school board
I
document.
would suggest that we do, I mean, for those of us that haven't ever done it, it will be the first time, but for those of you that have done it, it'll be called a refresher course.
Yep.
Or training.
Come March.
I think it'd be great to do it every year.
So that, I will call on the next person in just a sec, but Commissioner Fisher, that might be something to add to our annual work plan, to think about adding, which is either April or May, but I think April, maybe even at the inaugural meeting of new commissioners, we have the right people there as part of our meeting. Commissioner Gulick? Oh, you're yielding your, okay. Curry? Commissioner Curry?
Yeah, I'll just share that, and probably Keith could echo this, that when I got on the board in 2013, there were very standardized procedures for orientation. And those are available from the SBA, and the procedures are typically that the chair and superintendent meet with the new board member and provide you with, it used to be a booklet, but now it wouldn't be a booklet, it would be something online.
Yeah,
And it's an entire compilation of documents that the board uses, whatever may be pertinent at the time. So that might be governance policies plus all the essential things you need to know, provided by the SBA. And then there was also an offer of a tour of any school, and the chair would sit down and kind of let you know the way the board operates. So there should be a very standardized approach, and it should be just automatic every April, or when people get elected or fill new seats.
Okay.
Or vacant seats.
Great idea. Reinstate.
Those are two good suggestions. I'm a big fan of mentor programs. So another option is that we could have mentors and maybe even small stipends for said mentors who could do an orientation, but then also be there for that person throughout the year who had issues or questions.
I don't think that's in our collective bargaining agreement.
Great, thank you.
Other thoughts? Great idea. Commissioner Fisher?
I would be supportive for some training and some help in parliamentary procedure. I think we need some help.
That's a great idea. Okay. I'm good. This is productive. Commissioner Avanci?
I'd be supportive in investing in our board and our trainings. I feel like I've had very little. I was fortunate to come in with 6 other new board members, and we did have an official 2-hour or so training, although some of our questions did not get answered that evening. I appreciated the implicit bias training that we received, and I believe those are supposed to happen every 6 months. And other suggestions like the mentoring program. And I know we were trained in restorative practices, and our district uses restorative practices. However, we have not done it as a board in a year and a half. So that would be another school board training.
So you don't like the sink or swim approach?
Well, plus it gives us an opportunity to bond in a different way.
Agreed.
I
This
think
is
it's
great.
helpful.
We realize how far we've come off the mark. Okay. Commissioner Carey?
It's also called trial by fire. The most important thing for me was when Joe came to us, and it was because we were all being sworn in that night, and he went through the legal requirements and the parameters around which we could speak and all that. That was very informative, and I don't believe the new members got that at all. So a yearly recollection of that would be great.
Great.
Great. Well, I think we've got some good suggestions in that regard. Commissioner Curry?
Yeah, just picking up on the equity training, the implicit bias training we had last week. We talked a lot about how inclusion is a choice, and I don't think that the the Department of Justice settlement and Title IX settlements and EEOC settlements is the way the district wants to do business because it's very expensive. And so that training for the board is really important in understanding, outside of the budget season, what the district could be doing as preventive steps in the area of inclusion, so that we're not facing costly legal battles. And I would throw in there a training on the equity report card so everybody understands. The DELT team is creating a new one this year, and it's a good opportunity for everybody to understand what the baselines are, what they mean, and how to track progress in inclusion and equity from year to year so that you are able to budget systematically for growth in that area, because it's a long-term proposition, but it's a lot cheaper than being sued all the time.
I wonder if we, just an idea, could use sort of a budget, where's my head? A board training checklist or incoming, you know what I mean? That way we can ensure it's systematized and we can just get it done, and if we have a checklist, we'll get it done. So maybe that's something we can develop. Okay? Any other thoughts on investing in our own governance to become, the wisest board members we possibly can be? Commissioner Pillsbury?
I think one of the things that we should be emphasizing, in addition to what some of the other things that we said here, is the engagement of each commissioner with their people in their district in different ways, that we could meet people so that they become more kind of like the owners of this district, because they're aware of what we're doing. So as we get more informed, having various different kinds of events that attract people to talk about what we're doing, it's let them know that they should be proud of all the things that are going on, as well as know some of our weaknesses that we have. And I think we ought to work on, I think, community engagement with those that that are your neighbors in your area or in your area, so that would continue to develop confidence in the board, but also in the school system. And I think that's maybe one area that we're not doing as good a job in as we could be doing, is having events for our own people that, letting them know what's going on in the school system.
Okay, and I think that maybe fits in with Rule 4.71C, where it says something about, the board shall ensure that it's got outreach mechanisms to ensure the board's ability to listen to the community's views and viewpoints.
Right.
So maybe we as
I'm not thinking about the board, but individuals.
Into their.
Right, in other words, we should set expectations, for lack of a better word, about board members engaging with their community, and maybe that's part of the training.
Each group, each community is different in how they do that, but I think it's important that that become one of the things that we see as important for the whole system.
Okay. Anything else on this one, or anyone have any concluding thoughts? Nathan?
Just to bring it back home to the specific question of the budget, to remind folks, so the main thing to keep in mind, I think, is simply that of that board budget that we set aside, really it's like I'd say the $10,000 that we set aside for professional services, that of all the money in that budget, that's the kind of most flexible. Again, things like your VSBA dues and those sort of things are, unless you were going to withdraw entirely, that's more or less spoken for. But in terms of an area where there's complete latitude to meet any of these, kind of priorities that you've identified, there's the $10,000 that's there. So for example, the recent training is from among that source. So my kind of question would be, is that adequate for next year? You don't have to answer that tonight, but before this process is over in January, if you think that is not adequate, then you definitely want to call that to my attention so that I can increase it and make sure that we have whatever is necessary for next year.
Thank you.
Okay, so then I think just takeaway here is perhaps if anyone is particularly interested in assisting the chair or myself and Mike in participating in coming up with a board orientation checklist so we make sure we can incorporate all this in time for April. Please just email us, let us know if you're interested in taking part in that, and everyone can take part, but if you're particularly interested, I'm sure we could use the help.
Great.
Okay, moving on to the next, because I heard the duck.
Just quickly,
Yeah.
but can you also put on your notes to make sure that you communicate to Director Lavery by at least mid-January, the number you want for the budget? Because you're gonna create this checklist, you're gonna have all kinds of things, you wanna do orientations and all, it's gonna cost. So we wanna miss that opportunity come April and say, well, we didn't
So-
budget for that.
Proposed, it's 41,000, Nate, you have under the 20.
Yeah, I think, give whatever is in there, I'm saying, but of that 41, like, you only really have, what I'd say, 10,000 that's not kind of at all spoken for in any
From the dues.
routine way that we would expect to use it. You know, I'm kind of ballparking here, but, so, if you said, oh, we want to do $20,000 worth of training, for example, I'd probably say, okay, we should add an additional 10,000 to the 10,000 we have in professional services already, so that in addition to the regular stuff that goes on for the budget, you have that flexibility.
Got it. I'm not hearing any huge dollar increases in what we've just discussed as a group, but I guess we'll get back to you with that.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to the next one. So we're on 4.6. Board committee principles. Just to set the table here, we have a very brief policy, 4.6, on board committee principles. It says the board committees, when used, will be used to help the board accomplish its work. And then it says that if we do create a committee, committee expectations and its authority will be clearly stated to make sure they don't conflict with authority delegated to the superintendent. And finally, the committee will not have the power to act for the board, but will make recommendations to the board, and the committee recommendations and reports will become an official part of the board's record or minutes. And so the prompt questions there would be, are you happy with our reinstatement of committees? Do you think that's been helpful to governance and to the school community? Have some or all of our committees been particularly helpful and successful? Are there examples pro and con? What could we improve in the operation and effectiveness of each of our existing committees? And recall that when we did reinstate committees, in order to continue to speak with one voice, we did require that committees are not decision-making bodies, but simply committees report findings and recommendations to the full board, and only the full board may act. Are we still good with this approach? And finally, are there any other committees you believe would improve our governance, and are there any committees that exist that maybe are not helpful? So those are the prompts. Kendra?
Yeah, so I wanted to see if we could either make a new committee or find a way to look at being innovative and proactive. And I feel like there's a lot of things that we want to discuss and talk about. We hear it from parents, we're seeing it ourselves, we hear it from some teachers, and so much of what we do is we have to do, right? So, but BHS late start times, aligning BTC schedules, dual enrollment schedules, course progressions, I mean, the list it could be huge, but it would be an interesting idea, I think, to have a committee that maybe just decides on the one or two that we want to do this year and do it. Get stakeholders' feedback and make some changes. So it could lie under community engagement. It could be something separate. I just want to throw something out there that it's like a committee of looking to the future. It could also be a budget. I mean, there's been ideas about looking at the budget in a different way. We have community members who are interested in different pieces of that. So throwing that out there.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I mean, if you, I'm just making this up, but you call it the Innovation Committee, and then I don't know if you'd be interested in writing up a potential, whatever you want to call it, committee mandate that the board could look at, and it's actually not hard to make a committee. You just make a resolution, and then someone would have to be willing to chair the committee, although I guess you're already chairing some other important matter. But you know what I mean? I personally think it's a great idea. Next, any other thoughts on committees?
I've always thought that the Community Involvement Committee was best suited to be the reactive component of kind of the opposite of what you're saying. Lean in when there's a need in our community and create a platform for people to come together, the invested, interested, and also the people who, from the district that are actually a part of whatever, whatever that situation is, aligning the community with into the proper channels, into a dialogue. And that would be when it happens, not, you don't schedule that ahead of time. So the flexibility for that to just happen on the fly.
Commissioner Wallace, help me understand what you just said. Did you say that, I'm not sure to what extent you were speaking to Kendra's idea about what I'll call the Innovation Committee. Are you saying the Innovation Committee should be part of the Community Engagement Committee?
No, I'm saying essentially, well, she suggested at some point that it be a part of the Community Engagement Committee. I think it should be its own, and I think the Community Engagement Committee should be as needed. And I use the word reactive because she used the word proactive.
Got it. Thank you. Martine?
I just wanted to say, I think if you look at a lot of other boards, a lot of this work that we're doing in separate committees falls under a community engagement committee. A community engagement committee will do curricular work, will do policy work, will do all of these other things in a rotating basis. So I think our policies have been great. I think it's been a way to make us more visible in the community. I think it's a way for us to be more transparent. I fear sometimes that we're going to end up looking at our own belly buttons a little bit too long, and I wonder if there's other work that we should be doing, like engaging with the state on funding and things like that. So I just want us to remain flexible and supple when it comes to our committees. And if we find that, hey, you know what, our policies are good, we're happy with the way our governance is right now, maybe we leave that and focus on this innovative or innovation committee. Same thing maybe with curriculum and so forth. So I guess I just want to caution us that we don't become too inward, and that we remain open to a lot of the other work that needs to be done as well outside of committees.
Okay.
And there are only so many hours in a week.
Yeah.
Some of us already, we work 60 hours a week already, so it's just hard.
Point well taken, Commissioner Carey.
Yeah, I'll just say that, I'm frustrated a little bit with the Personnel and Curriculum Committee. I think because it's a huge task, 2 giant subjects to try to cover on a monthly basis. But it has been the most interesting discussions and dialogue that I've had since I've been on the board has been at those meetings with community members who show up and they're interested in the particular topic at the time. So, I'm hearing what Kendra's saying too, and what's frustrating me about the curriculum personnel is that I really want to talk about ways that we can start adapting the curriculum to 21st century models and do, more hands-on, more realistic kind of things like City and Lake and the different schools and all that. That's a very interesting discussion to have and figure out the scheduling and all that, but it doesn't fit in a reasonable way. It fits into the curriculum aspect, I think, of the Curriculum Personnel Committee, but when we bounce from personnel to curriculum, back to personnel, back to curriculum on a monthly basis, the year is over, and what's been accomplished? Not much, although, again, I think we have made some forward progress this year, and I'll reiterate that it has been the most interesting dialogue that I've experienced, although this is interesting too, tonight, right? This is more like what we do in committee. And I do see committees as the community engagement opportunity. So the community engagement is kind of redundant. The curriculum committee, the personnel committee, the finance committee, those are the ways that the community can engage with us in a casual way that is meaningful. So anyway, I'm still trying to figure out where to go and how they operate and what to do and what the topics are. I'd love to see data forthcoming when I ask for it. I have not seen that from the district. I'd love to see leadership participate. I have had leaders come to our meetings, but not that often, and I think it's important that leadership attend and listen to what's going on and give information, because we're still lay people trying to figure out the inside workings of the district. So with that, I'll stop. There are lots of ideas, but I love the idea of being innovative instead of reactive, and let's think of where we want to go as a district in terms of transforming the way we deliver education here, the way we help students, okay?
Okay. Commissioner Gulick?
I want to push back a little bit on whether curriculum is board work. I'm sure it's been great to interact with members of the public at those meetings, but is that board work, setting curriculum, or is it district work? Same thing with personnel. So again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but I think it's a good question for us to ask as a board. Who should be leading that work?
Commissioner Fisher? So, a couple notes on first in terms of the Community Engagement Committee, and I want to respectfully disagree with Commissioner Waltz. I think that there's absolutely opportunities for that committee to be reactive, but I would love to see that committee, and we talked when we formed it, is to be proactive and be reaching out to parts of the community that we don't hear from. We've talked about it. We know that there are parts of the community that we don't hear from. So actively going out into the community to seek out those voices, I think, is a great mission. And it's hard, right? It's very hard. So I'd like to see that. In terms of the Finance and Facilities Committee, for good reason, you guys were focused on facilities. And what we didn't get was a lot of work on the budget. And so I know we talked about it last year. Hey, next year we'll run this through the process through the Finance Committee, and that's also an opportunity for community engagement. So I don't know whether, with what's on tap coming forward, whether we should split that out and just have facilities, VHS committee, whatever, and split out finance separately so it can focus. So, no offense, Superintendent Obeng, but we should not be discussing here what approach is right. This is a meeting to get work done. That discussion about the approach should already happen. And so my last point is, we discussed and debated about reestablishing committees. And to me, without a doubt, it's been a huge value. And Commissioner Carey, you said, this is where the real dialogue happens. It happens not just between board members, but between board members and staff and teachers and community members. And it's not at this board meeting, right? So to me, the fact that how much has gone on in those committees and the engagement that's happened with staff and the community, I think, has been a resounding success.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Commissioner Waltz?
Don't disagree at all. I think there needs to be room for a way for us to, in a timely manner, bring people together to resolve what might be a big issue. And I'm going to talk about, I was really lucky that DE and I were able to invite, after the bus incident, we're able to invite people from the community, and people from GMT were actually able to come. I mean, it really worked out in a great way. After the Hunt incident, there were several meetings that we scheduled separately from any other committee, just because it was a lot of friends of mine that were concerned, and I figured, why not? But I don't necessarily want to call that community engagement then. Maybe it is a different thing. Maybe it needs, but there needs to be a space for that, and it needs to have, I don't know, whatever minutes need to be taken, it needs to be warned, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Jeannie. Commissioner Curran?
Yeah, I think for me, having joined the board when there were committees, going to a board that had very few committees and going back to a board that has committees, what is helpful is, like Mike said, having those more intensive conversations with community members, and having more time to really hear them. And that seems to happen a lot at DE and I. And what I find really difficult is that then there isn't time during the board meeting to share that information. So the comment tonight about the absence of public input at the budget meetings, I mean, at the DE&I committee, it's anything but. I mean, that we have tons of public input and very, dire needs and requests. And so those are in the minutes, and we try and highlight them, but they're not really given the weight that they get at the committee level. And so for me, what's been, I just haven't felt like the information that all the committees handle is organized systematically for the board throughout the year. And so like tonight we have Orton Gillingham on the budget, but I have no idea from the curriculum committee if Orton Gillingham is like still what we need. Has it been working? Do we have enough? How much do we need? What have we invested in? How much more do we need? How many years would it take? Like, I just have no idea from the curriculum committee, but I'd rather have, just a more systematized process of understanding, like, if each committee had, or if the board had a work plan at the retreat, and then each committee identified, these are our goals for this year that tie back to the work plan, that tie back to the strategic plan, and then the staff would know this committee's gonna need data because they have these goals this year, and that's all. And like, as you all have probably learned by now, you can't just take up every fire in the district and put it out every year. So there's just choices. So if each committee just said, these are our goals for this year, and the staff would know what to expect, and so that now we have a data request form, which I thought was brilliant, that can be used. But it would have to tie to that annual work plan.
Thanks, Liz. I hear the ducks. What are our takeaways here? I think, do we have any action items? Not quite sure. Commissioner Fisher?
So how about this recommendation that each committee over the next month or two take some time and reflect and have a discussion about the mission, review the motion, their essentially their charter, and take some time, do some self-reflection, and report back to the board and make some recommendations.
How it ties into the annual work plan?
We could tie it into the annual work plan, but I'm saying just
How their committee work.
I think that just taking some, I'm not looking to tie it back to the work plan. I think the work plan is a schedule, and I think right now we've thrown out a bunch of ideas, and I think it's time to have a rich discussion, and it's at the committees that we have those rich discussions, and then bring back a recommendation, which is what the 4.6 says. Have the discussion, bring back a recommendation.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you. Okay, we'll conclude this part of the evening.
Great. Next on the agenda is, sorry, 7 committee reports. Yep. Commissioner Pillsbury, Finance, Facilities and Finance Committee.
We met a lot, but as far as recommendations or actions, there isn't any. Basically, let's talk about the VHS BTC construction project. Basically, we're waiting on Whiting Turner to come back with their estimate of this design that we have. Meanwhile, we've been, as a committee and with staff from the administration, making sure that what we really have in this design. We arbitrarily put names of people and staff in different classrooms and offices so that we know we had everybody have a space. We definitely wanted to make sure that we had that, and we realized where we had some available space that wasn't being used at the most the period at which has the most classes going on. I guess that's the way I should say it. So we've been working every week. We'd be 2 hours, and what do we can we show on is trying to make sure that this design is going to work for us. But now we're waiting for the estimates to come in, and they're supposed to come in on the 19th, and so we got another week. I'm assuming we're meeting tomorrow morning, And so that, another meeting where I think the basic bottom line, why the board's involved in this, is to make sure that what we said we wanted to make sure our new construction had is there. You know, we're constantly reminding them of security, access, 21st century tech, 21st century learning. I know I've forgotten something, but we keep kind of making, that's what we're there for, to remind them what we said we were going to do. Now, the 10-year capital plan is another thing that we are overseeing and making sure that the money is available when we, for the projects that we said we were going to do, and we have to make sure that we can actually do those projects. That means for some of the bigger projects like Edmonds Middle School, we need to find a space for the children to be at while we're working on it, or what's our alternative? How are we going to do that project, the heating and ventilating? And the same thing is true for integrated arts. How do we do those projects? So that's a constant discussion that we have. So there's a reason why we haven't gotten to the budget, because we have all of this. But part of the finance budget is the bonding cost, the interest rate. So we're trying to figure out a way to do these projects so that we don't pay a lot in the cost of the bond, the interest rate. So I can say we've met, we've had a lot of discussion, but I can't tell you that we have any. We're still trying to do the research. And that's basically what our committee is doing.
Thank you,
Give you a
Commissioner.
background, so when we present something to you, we present it with some kind of enlightened intelligence.
Thank you, Commissioner Pillsbury. Policy and Governance Committee, Commissioner Fisher and Wick. Oh, sorry, yes.
So I appreciate the back and forth, Keith, that we had on email. I still had some unanswered questions, which is, I still don't understand if we have a pre-K plan or not. Are we doing the north-south building, or what are we doing? Is there anything written down?
Well, we were discussing about the plan had some issues in our communities. There are two plans, okay?
Right.
So we're talking about how we can bring back proposals to the full board, which you will make the final. We don't have a plan.
So we don't have a plan yet?
No, that's the answer.
Thank you.
That's the answer, no.
Okay. And
No.
secondly, the minutes said that a budget timeline had been presented by the Director of Finance, but the budget timeline wasn't attached to the minutes. Has anybody else seen a budget timeline?
What he did was, it was an informal discussion, but I think you've actually seen it, and he told us. We had at one of our meetings, he laid out the dates that we were going to do the various things. You have that in one of his reports. I can't tell you the month right now, but he basically went over what you got. You received it either the same day or the next day after he talked. Just
The budget timeline?
Yeah.
Was that separate than your memo?
It is separate, and it's also online. So if you just go to the budget website and go to FY21, there's a little timeline, just says when meetings are and that sort of thing.
Okay.
He was just basically asking us if we had anything else we wanted to add to it. Not to the budget, but to the timeline.
Any other discussion? Thank you. Policy and Governance Committee.
So Policy and Governance Committee did not meet within the last 30 days. We have a meeting planned for next Thursday. Somebody mentioned, the policy is pretty baked. And you didn't say baked. You said, we're pretty solid. But just to give you an idea, I've queued up, I have 21 potential things for the policy governance to look at. So there's plenty of work. I'm sorry, you didn't say that. Okay.
Any discussion?
I apologize.
Let me just supplement that the reason we didn't meet in the last 30 days is not because we're, just lazy. Our last meeting conflicted with the implicit bias training, so we yielded our meeting for that. And so, but what else is on our agenda, just to tantalize you for next Thursday?
We gotta go.
I think it's important. Just take a second. We're going to be looking at a schedule by which we review the sort of more block and tackle district operational policies. You know, the ones like animal dissection and, you know, all that stuff that we got started on that we sort of got stalled here. So Mike and I are committing to make sure that we review those and, you know, bring them to the board as needed. Very exciting. And we are also going to go over that list and talk through what Mike has on his list. But also, we're going to be talking a little bit more about metrics, key performance indicators, I think is the language that is used these days. So if that's of interest, we're meeting at 6:15 p.m. next Thursday night. I apologize, Finance and Facilities. I think it conflicts with your meeting. We just couldn't find another time. At Champlain Elementary, we'll be at Champlain.
Thank you. Next is Personnel and Curriculum.
I just wanted to ask sorry, Fisher and Wick, are you going back to first Thursday, third Thursday of the month?
Yeah, first and fourth, but
First and
first
fourth?
and fourth Thursday was ended up our schedule, but it's like the day after Christmas, and it's January 2nd, which is so.
Because you had it on a
holiday, so
Wednesday.
End of year conflict.
So what is it?
It's been
It's
tough.
first-
So it's going to be first and fourth, right?
first and
But
fourth.
not in December because the 4th happens to be the day after Christmas.
Okay. So
You
is your,
realize that's consecutive weeks?
Yeah,
fourth
we
and
don't like
first.
it. We like the first and the third, but we wanted to yield our third to the Finance and Facilities because they had added a third. So
Thank
it's
you.
the next best thing we could come up with.
Okay.
and I know, I wasn't sure if there's been conflicts with DE&I, but your meetings,
Fourth Tuesday of the month?
yes. And Curriculum and Personnel?
It's,
All set with your, going
it's
into
the-
the new year?
It's the second Wednesday of the month,
Thank you.
which is tomorrow.
Yeah,
Right?
thank you. Great. Next, so Personnel and Curriculum Committee update.
Well, the last meeting we had of that particular group was on my birthday, 9/11. And it was a a further discussion of the situation regarding special ed in the district. We had some teachers there, and we had a series of questions, and we informally discussed the questions that we had brought to the meeting. And that's available to you in a document somewhere. The minutes are, pardon me, on board docs. Okay. Okay. So that's in there for you. So in the meantime, we've been trying to coordinate this magnet school task force, and the only time that we could really meet with a bunch of people was at the curriculum personnel committee meeting time, which was 3 weeks ago. And we had a very interesting and very large group meeting at IAA, including lots of principals, lots of district leadership people, many board members. Very interesting discussion that kind of directed the magnet school task force into a elementary school study task force group. And tomorrow night's curriculum personnel meeting, that's the first thing on the agenda, the update on the elementary magnet school task force. There were like 8 or 9 pages of notes that I'm trying to create a 1-page document that summarizes it. So we're going to look at that tomorrow night and decide where to go from there. And I believe what we do next is we make recommendations to the board based on this discussion. So that part of that document is left blank, and I would like to fill that in tomorrow night. I think Kathy's going to be here. I know Stephanie Phillips is going to join us tomorrow night. So that's great because she has so much knowledge and about all kinds of different things. But that's first on the agenda tomorrow. It's at 6 p.m. at SA. It's been changed to SA because IAA was booked. So we're going to go back to the community room at SA. The second thing on tomorrow night's agenda is budget priorities for 2021. I want to know from Stephanie what she thinks the priorities should be because we're talking about budgets, and I'd like to get her input. She is, the leader of curriculum in the district. Next, she's going to update us on the Orton Gillingham reading training, which has been, part of what's been going on for a year. There have been some reports from the committee on that at least twice, and I'm hoping to hear that. Well, I'll leave it at that. Tomorrow night, Stephanie will update us on the training that's been taking place in the district in Orton Gillingham and where we need to go from here. And is there any data that shows that we've been successful in terms of, breaching the learning gap between readers and non-readers. And in terms of what Kendra said earlier, this is a giant agenda for tomorrow, but I would like to talk about expanding pathways and opportunities for high school and middle school students, the way that City and Lake does, and at least get some ideas out there and start talking about it, and because that's, the curriculum that we need to do. And then finally, updates on PLPs, personal learning plans, because that has come up recently too. What is it? Where are we in terms of that? We heard a year ago from the people on that, and Stephanie can also give us some information on that we might pursue in greater detail as the year progresses. But as what I said a little earlier, this is a huge agenda. I'm not sure how far we're going to get through it. We do have a limited time period, 2 hours tomorrow, 6 to 8, and we'll see how far we get. And you'll look for minutes.
Any discussion for Commissioner Carey? One question I have, and Superintendent Bang, are we in communication, is there a published list of those that are on the Magnet School Task Force?
Yes, it's going to be included in when you get the minutes of that. I'll list the names of all the people who came, yes.
So is it people who come, or are we working together with the superintendent? Or superintendent, I would ask, can we work together? Because I know you had asked me, is the Personnel and Curriculum Committee leading the task force, or are we doing it as a district under your guidance? But is it?
No, I think yeah, go ahead.
So at the meeting that we had last spring, we had about 15 volunteers to be on that task force, and that's in the minutes from that meeting.
Yes, I saw that.
So those people have been invited, and those people have, for the most part, come to the meetings. But I have specific lists of who showed up, so that you'll get. People who wanted to be part of it have faded out, and others have joined us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the curriculum committee has kind of led the way.
Right.
We have staff who are interested, who I initially had assigned to be part of it, and so I think more staff attended than the initial 1 or 2 people, so people are interested. So we'll look forward to the curriculum committee's update on that, and staff will be able to support however.
So from your point of view, Stephanie Phillips is the district appointee for the Magnet School Task Force working with Commissioner Carey?
No, initially was Victor. Yeah, I know Stephanie's supporting because she's a curriculum person, but Victor has been the.
So Victor is your appointee?
Victor.
Victor was at the last meeting, it was very informative. What else was I going to say? I'm sorry, I forget it right now.
Okay. Well, thank you for your work. I look forward to reading the minutes from the meeting.
Oh, I was going to ask if the board would like to see the raw notes taken from the meeting we had at IA. I can forward them to you. It's kind of unwieldy, but it's interesting. Jeannie's seen them. It's.
In the one-pager?
No, the giant one, the 8, 9 pages that Tyler took.
I don't think we should do that.
Okay. Yeah, we won't. It's better to get the summary. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. And next is DE&I. Commissioner Vonchik and Curry.
So at our last meeting, we were supposed to hear about the Department of Justice settlement and the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium. But unfortunately, Sparks didn't show, and we will make sure to put in a request that we hear about this at our next community meeting, which I believe will be towards the end of January. And we would like to be the committee that kind of keeps track of the progress with this agreement. We did hear from, we had an interesting public comment. The community outreach person from Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program came and talked to us about the issue at the high school with new Americans not getting appropriate guidance counseling and being able to apply to colleges and their progress in high school. So we had a lengthy discussion about that. And then we moved on to the Equity and Inclusion Report discussion. So typically that report is due in October. However, the powers that be, the DELT committee essentially decided to, along with Karen Vogel, to revamp that report, and they're changing the look of it so that it looks like one that is being published by the New Orleans School District. So we saw the example that they provided from New Orleans. We're still waiting to hear when this report will come out from the district, because in September and October, we were told December 3rd. And we had a lively discussion about the committee's requests for this report. And so I could list those right now. So keep all indicators that are in the current report. So the current report is from school year 2017-18. That came out a year ago in October. And then other access indicators. What kind of access to alternative programs such as EL, special need, or EL students, special needs, students of color, and whole school versus whole school populations. So we would like to see that in the report. Staff and teacher demographic data, and I believe we were told that students that are on 504 plans aren't currently separated out from IEP plans or the general population. So we would like that to appear separate.
Great.
Anything? Commissioner Curd?
Any discussion or follow-up? All right, seeing none. Commissioner Goulet?
It's not about that.
Yeah.
I would just like to ask permission to give a really quick update on the superintendent search.
Yes.
And also ask that next week, either Yao or I get to give a quick update on the French immersion meeting that we had.
Great.
That could be on the
We'll add
next
that to the
agenda.
agenda.
Okay. So Kendra lugged a whole bunch of packets for you, so I think it would be good if we could get those out tonight. But basically, the long and short of it is we met with someone from McPherson and Jacobson yesterday, a firm that does superintendent search work, and that was the only group thus far that has responded to our request. We are gonna hopefully meet on Friday with the VSBA to give them a chance to pitch their services as well. But for now, I guess we just want you guys to take these packets and give them a look so that you know what is being offered by this group. And other than that, we don't have a lot to report this time.
Do you have a sense why other groups didn't respond?
Z might know
I
better.
think it's lack of personnel, but Gassy, yeah, I think they're just all short-staffed. And I just read a big article in the, I don't know if it was the New York Times, or saying how almost every school district is using these services now, these firms, to hire superintendents, because the pool is so small, and there's a lot of competition, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move to item number 10, which will cover the monitoring reports. We'll move to executives.
2.2,
2.2, sorry. 2.2 superintendent monitoring report. So, superintendent, thank you.
Thank you. I have our newly minted Director of HR here, and this is the first monitoring report. Just, I know she'll go over this a little bit, but our annual, the cycle for our monitoring reports are annually. So she didn't have the luxury of being present when some of these actions happened. So I know that she did tap into previous staff and whatever data was available in order to try to be consistent with our template. I do suspect that the monitoring reports will look different. I know Commissioner Fisher is working with staff and group to look at some KPIs and some formatting. So this will probably be the last iteration in this form. I would suspect that we'll have some different metrics or something in terms of going forward. But here's Z to present the information as presented.
Thank you.
So I created the monitor report based on the documentation I received from last year. and tried to mirror what was reported last year to this year for FY19, even though I was not present. The data information regarding hiring metrics and analytics, that did come in real time, and I did generate that information based on PowerSchool Talent Ed analytics. So if you've had a few days to read this, if you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them or research them.
Okay. Any commissioners' questions at this time? Okay. Commissioner Fisher?
Sorry. So number one, just trying to bring it up. Number one, I really appreciate the data that you tried to put into, that you did put into this. I think it's a move in the right direction, as you all know. A couple questions on what you put in and then something else. The data around the hiring and the recruitment was pretty interesting. So a while ago, we looked at, and I'm looking at diverse candidates, right? And while we were talking about why don't we have more diverse staff and why don't we have more diverse teachers, and I see the comparison, love the comparison year to year. We did not improve our recruitment of candidates, and so I know he keeps saying you're newly minted. I don't know how many months he keeps saying that, but I would encourage you to, when you start to look at increasing the diversity of our staff, as I think the numbers show, we're failing on recruitment, and it's not the hiring. The hiring numbers actually look like I think it's appropriate, but the recruitment is where. And is that what your interpretation of the numbers are?
Which particular graph are you referring to?
So it's all the way at the end. Hold on, I'll bring it up.
Number 7. 6.
So there's really two different graphs, both very colorful. So the first one is, well, let's say we're just looking at certified only, right? Because we know that teachers of color have a documented positive impact on students of color. And so looking at page 11. Yes, so looking at page 11, right, the number of applicants, just looking at like FY 18 to 19 for Black or African American, it's up 0.2%. That's, nothing. And so that to me says we can't expect to hire a large amount, increasing amounts of Black or African American teachers or certified personnel if they're not coming to us.
So I can't speak to what happened in FY19. I have some thoughts that we can improve by engaging other outside organizations that would help bring candidates forward. And I've been working on getting ready to start that process because our big push for hiring will be this spring. So the hope would be that we'll be able to do some outreach so that we can have a more varied pool.
Great, thank you. My next comment is on grievances. So you noted how many grievances were closed, but I know that I heard when I was running for the board, which is a long time ago, before your time, that the amount of open grievances was significant. So can you give us some information about, there was something like 39 grievances were closed for the year. Can you give us an idea of how many were open versus closed and what the average length of time is to close those grievances?
I don't have that. Well, keep in mind, grievances come in, it's kind of like spam. We have no control. They just come to us. The hope is we can resolve them quickly. But I don't have the statistics. I'm happy to research that and bring that back.
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay, so you want total number of open grievances versus closed?
Like if we closed 39, how many were open? Like what was the delta between how many left open? And I don't know what the baseline is, right? So that's, I'm just looking for information on grievances. Felt like it was just one part of the picture.
All right.
The other question I had is around the statement, employees are offered a restorative practice model for addressing concerns and conflicts where appropriate. Continue to offer restorative practices as an avenue to resolving grievances. So I thought the district, we were implementing restorative practice, I think it's called level 1, right? Level 2 is where you get to, level 2 is when you start to use RP for conflict resolution. Have we established level 2 RP for our district staff?
We're engaging in RP for all staff.
I recall there were opportunities for staff to do a restorative process when it was staff on staff in the past year. So that's what was being referred to. The idea is to hopefully develop our capacity that it becomes a strategy that staff chooses when there's a conflict in terms of resolving.
Okay. And finally, something that I mentioned to Director Anderson-Brown. And I appreciate that you were asked to do this report based on last year's. Unfortunately, the policy has changed from last year, and we added some significant sections around obligations for the superintendent to give us data on hiring of interim and permanent leaders. That was not reported on. So what I would ask is, I appreciate what was reported on, but I would ask that you come back with an updated report for the other, including the other sections. Sorry, not next year.
For last year?
This past year.
This past year. So I mean,
FY19.
There's
This data is on.
This data
is for FY
19.
19. So you want to do the supplemental for FY 19?
What I think is that you can report on the sections of the policy that we added. You may not have data through the full year, but for example, one of the sections is when you're presenting a candidate to the board, you need to have, there's a list of 85 things, right? So you can report on whether you were complying with that.
Okay.
You want to chat afterwards?
Yeah, we can talk.
Okay.
That may not be my interpretation of the policy, but
Okay.
we can talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pillsbury? Thank you.
Ms. HR.
Yes.
I heard you say that we were going to do more national searches. We have a lot of wonderful children of color who are graduating from our high school, going on to college. Are we making any efforts to attract them to stay in Burlington? And since they have an experience in our system, they know our weaknesses, our strengths. And is there any effort, there was a program we did, I know, before, back pre-2014 when I stepped off, where we had an agreement with the university that if our students went there and then they came back to teach with us, then there would be some advantage to the student. And of course, that didn't attract a lot of people, but I think we have a lot more of our students who've gone through our system. And I'm hoping that you can work on attracting those students, even if we talk to them in their senior year or when they before they go into college, about would they think about coming back and working for us in our district as a teacher.
So would you like some hot statistics that will not make you happy? So I just got back from a national conference from ASPA, who reported that there is a 34% drop in students who are picking education as a major.
Yes, you know what, I understand that, but one of the things we have to do is make it attractive.
We do.
And so it's, and I think we've always gone on the negative part, but it's all about promotion and the opportunities in Burlington. They're going to be one of the higher paid teachers in the state.
Agreed.
They come here. I think we have a lot going for us, plus they know what the system is like. And so I'm just sort of trying to say, I just want to put this idea out there that maybe the way we increase our number of hires of non-white faculty or staff is attracting our own graduates.
Mm-hmm. I would love to do that. So, it's nice. We have excellent staff that engage not only the students but the parents. their experience with the Burlington School District starts day one.
Right.
And I know that Burlington is a wonderful place. We have a great school system. I hope that we can attract those students back once they're thinking about their student teaching assignments and picking an employer of choice, and hopefully that would be their home base.
Thank you. That was great. Commissioner Curry.
Bet you're on the hot seat tonight. I think we're veering into a broader conversation, but if the chair will permit it, I'd like to just follow along that conversation.
Great.
So I just wanted to make you aware that the DE&I committee has in the past discussed diverse hiring practices as an agenda item within its kind of overall framework. And so we were going to, again, address that issue for the rest of this fiscal year, just to make you aware of that. Okay, because other people have come to us with questions and suggestions. Very early on, Commissioner Gulick came with the same idea that if there are students of color already attending VHS, would they be interested in going into education? And I think, bottom line, the only way we know is to ask. And so it's really, do they want to do that? And that's a kind of a, rhetorical question. But I also just wanted to mention that as a kind of more systemic approach, both the city and Winooski are also looking at diverse hiring practices. So I would just encourage the district to look at opportunities for collaboration with the city, with Winooski, to share resources and approaches and not necessarily to get territorial. I mean, I know there's kind of union and salary differences when someone looks at the two districts, but perhaps there are enough positions that, there could be more of a regional approach. And then we had a member of the public come to the DE&I committee who suggested a promotion from within, because we do have after-school staff and support staff and supplemental staff of color who may be interested in teaching. And so, it may mean a partnership with BSAC, with Winooski, with the legislature, with, some way the legal framework could support a approach that, makes available resources equitably to staff working in education who may not be teachers yet and would like to be. So just more comments than anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. With this, I'd like to ask if there's any other questions. We'll move on. Thank you, Z, for the preparation of this. We will move to close this portion, and we'll move to item number 11, executive session. Commissioner Fisher.
I make a motion to consider executive session under 1 VSA 313A1A E and F, because premature general public knowledge would put the district at a substantial disadvantage, to discuss, these are bargaining negotiations, is that correct? Collective bargaining negotiations?
Yep.
That's all we're discussing?
No, we're also going in, did you waive it, or are we going in for the 2.2?
And we are also discussing
Personnel,
evaluation of the superintendent?
That's the category that it would fall under.
I guess
because
so,
it's
yeah.
evaluative.
Yes, evaluative comments.
Okay,
I guess
so that's under 313A1, A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Well, yeah, 313A3 is the evaluation stuff.
Okay.
Okay. All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we'll move to executive session.